It was fortunate that Headmaster Qin Yuan had given the flying boat to him, a device of unparalleled speed. However, Yun Shuixing's level was far higher than his. Against someone at the pinnacle of the noble plane, he was unable to shake her off, even running away using a ritual implement. If she were to get any closer, he would fall under the influence of her cold spells. The chase took place at a neck-breaking speed as they gradually reached the edge of the icy cold world. Yi Futian continued running as they went outside the area, and he found the woman continuing the chase, but she was unable to close in on him. "I was just trying to be nice. Do you have to go this far?" Yi Futian shouted at the silhouette behind him. Cold spears zipped at him. Yi Futian was startled enough that he turned around and continued steering the flying boat forward in an arc. He was irritated. He was able to understand the annoyance that the woman behind him was going through. While it was all just a misunderstanding, awakening to see herself in the embrace of a stranger, who was a man, was still something no woman would want to experience. He explained what happened, and she continued to come for his neck, and that was too much for him. Both zipped past in the air and finally made it into the law battle area. Yi Futian sighed in relief. That woman won't dare do anything now that we're here. Two people below were puzzled. Is that Yun Shuixing of Daozang Palace? Yun Shuixing was known for her diligence in training, and she was hardly seen anywhere. She had immense talent and was a stunning beauty. Her high rank in the law rank made her a famous figure in the Holy Ji Palace, and many knew her. Who is she going after? Someone looked in the direction of the chase. That's Yi Futian. The one who ranked first in the battle to enter the Holy Ji Palace, someone else answered, and many flocked to see what was going on. Just how did that newbie manage to get on Yun Shuixing's bad side? Yi Futian continued forward. The golden sky-reaching tower was seen right before him, and there were many disciples of the palace about. Many saw the two silhouettes in a chase in the air, and some came before Yi Futian, trying to block his way. Yi Futian frowned and stopped at a certain distance between him and the woman chasing him. He had never seemed to have offended anyone, so he was puzzled as to why there were people blocking his way. "Don't you think you've gone too far, girl?" Yi Futian stopped, turning around to address Yun Shuixing coming at him. The air around them turned incredibly cold in an instant. The currents seemed to slow down and the cold encroached yet again, making Yi Futian feel as if he was still within the ice zone. Yun Shuixing scanned the ones around him without saying a word. What did he do to offend Sister Yun? One of the people who went to block Yi Futian off asked Yun Shuixing. Yi Futian had only realized then that it was not that he had done anything to offend the other guy, but that the other guy wanted to somehow show off to the woman chasing him. Yun Shuixing did not answer, as she was simply unable to. She looked at Yi Futian with cold eyes and said, "Come with me." "Go with you?" Yi Futian eyed Yun Shuixing, not knowing what she was up to. "Are you trying to make me take responsibility for you or something?" Yi Futian asked with a smirk. Everyone within earshot froze at the question. Taking responsibility for Yun Shuixing? Yun Shuixing was stunned herself. Her expression was incredibly cold and many murmured below them. It was only when Yi Futian's name was spoken that they knew that the young man was the number one newbie, and the one who ranked last on the law rank. It was also said that the young man was incredibly shameless. He went about ambushing Wang Yu despite being new to the place, having no consideration for status or face whatsoever. Just what did this guy do? Yun Shuixing? Silence. Yun Shuixing said coldly, "Come with you and I will not kill you." Kill? Many got even more intrigued, specifically about what Yi Futian did. "Sister Yun, what has he done to you?" a girl asked again. She looked incredibly stunning and carried herself with an air of elegance. She also studied in Daozang Palace and shared an amicable bond with Yun Shuixing. Suspecting that Yi Futian had actually done something to her friend, she looked at Yi Futian with a tinge of hostility. "Nothing," Yun Shuixing answered lightly while keeping her eyes on Yi Futian. "Just go. I'll just pretend it never happened, and you and I never meet each other," Yi Futian said, looking at Yun Shuixing. Yun Shuixing responded by taking a step forward, her cold aura increasingly intense, and her spells went on to encompass Yi Futian. Many saw that he was about to be thoroughly frozen in mere seconds. The freezing power was extremely intense, so much so that not even flames would have been able to do anything to withstand it. He felt his body being encroached and his blood about to freeze. "If you won't stop what you're doing, I'll tell everyone what happened between us," Yi Futian said loudly, and everything seemed to freeze instantly. Everyone lifted their heads to look at Yi Futian. What happened between the two of them? What did he do to Yun Shuisheng? As expected, Yun Shuisheng stopped what she was doing. Despite her temperance, it was not hard to see that she was still infuriated, and her eyes were still fixed on Yi Futian. "Nothing happened between us," Yun Shuisheng said coldly. "If that is actually true, tell what happened and let everyone judge for themselves," Yi Futian added. "Yi Futian," Yun Shuisheng uttered his name coldly. She came to know his name from the chatter taking place below her. "I'll remember you." Yun Shuisheng glared at Yi Futian before turning around and leaving. The cold aura dispersed and Yi Futian sighed. However, the relief did nothing to ease his frustration. His kindness was viciously returned. He had become a big, glowing target. Worse still, he had been threatened. "I sure as hell don't think anyone would be alright with something like that happening to them," he thought. "Nice body you have there," Yi Futian quipped as he saw Yun Shuisheng walking away. Yun Shuisheng halted briefly and shuddered before leaving the scene. She did not get herself entangled further, as she knew he would actually make good on his words. Many present were infuriated by Yi Futian's words. "What do you mean, nice body? Why had Sister Yun chased him all over the place like that yet did not end up daring to lift a finger against him?" Their conversation piqued the interests of many. Just what did that bastard do to Yun Shuisheng? Many disciples of Daozang Palace revered and idolized the cool beauty who ranked high on the low rank, and they were immensely irked at Yi Futian making a pass at her. "Has this guy no shame?" someone asked coldly. "What a vile creature. No one expected the one who ranked first in the law battles would be so despicable." It was only natural that Yi Futian heard everything and felt everyone's hostility towards him. However, he was never one to bother himself much with the opinions of others. He saw no need to explain himself. He glanced at the sky-reaching tower and made his way there. He figured it would do him good to train for a bit since he was already there. "You think you can just walk away like this?" A dashing youth crossed his arms and looked at Yi Futian, blocking his way. Yi Futian frowned and asked, "Do I know you?" The youth gave a sarcastic smirk. It was obvious that they did not know each other. "Teach him how we do things here in the Holy Ji Palace," someone quipped. It was the girl who seemed to be a friend of Yun Shuisheng. Her cold eyes continued to glare at Yi Futian. "And who would you be?" Yi Futian could not help but ask the girl as several people walked in his direction. "You don't need to know. How dare you behave so insolently when you have just arrived here? Insulting Sister Yun and all. She might have let you off the hook, but we are not done." The girl took to the air. Her hair billowed and her expression remained cold. She felt compelled to teach him a lesson, even if he was the champion of the law battle. The one before their eyes, however, despite having incredibly good looks, was a despicable one like no other. It was a pity that someone so vile was so handsome. "And you, senior, what is your plane?" Yi Futian looked at the crossed-armed youth before him. "Grade 6 noble," the youth smirked as he answered. "I will fight you then." Yi Futian added, "As my plane was still low, may I be allowed to use a ritual implement?" "Beware of traps," the girl beside the youth reminded. "That is one vile creature, and you can't just fall into his trap." Furthermore, despite being despicable and shameless, his might as the champion to enter the palace was not just for show, and he is definitely powerful to a certain extent. He needs prowess equal to a grade 7 noble plane to be a champion. If he is allowed the use of sage ritual implements, he will be difficult to deal with when he gets serious. They had already given Yi Futian a chance to challenge who he fancied, and they were not about to say yes to such a request. "Of course, you should be allowed to use a ritual implement yourself," Yi Futian said plainly after sparing a glance at the girl. All right then. The youth smiled. No member of the Holy Ji Palace was someone common who could be found just anywhere. It was a given that the youth packed something tremendous himself, and Yi Futian had no way of getting an edge using such tricks. I thank you for your generosity. May I know your name? If I were to lose, I'd at least like to know to whom I lost, Yi Futian added. The name's Yen Xian, the youth said. Aren't you talking a little too much? I look forward to learn from you, senior, Yi Futian said as he cupped his hands. He took out the polearm of divine destruction without saying another word, and he became clad in starlight. That is a pretentious one. Many looked at Yi Futian, who behaved politely despite obviously feeling very irritated inside. He had smiled broadly and addressed the other party as senior. They were rather impressed at the thickness of his hide. Make your move, Yen Xian said plainly. Terrifying thunderous power blazed in a mere instant. Their surroundings trembled instantaneously as Yen Xian seemed to have become another person. A shadow of a tremendously huge thunder god appeared behind him. The shadow carried a thunder hammer that seemed to be able to crush the earth beneath them with one swing. Yen Xian, the proud son of the top force of Zhongzhou City, the Lightning Court. He had only broken through Noble Plain about 3 years ago and had earned the favor of the elders in the Daozang Palace of the Holy Ji Palace shortly after. He was offered a place in the palace. Now, 3 years had passed, and his training progressed to grade 6 Noble Plain. He had acquired impeccable control of the power of lightning will. While Yen Xian was eager to teach the newbie who was the champion of the law battle, he did not allow himself to underestimate his opponent. The guy who was all smiles before him, Yi Futian, knew no restraint when he got serious, and Wang Yu served as a shining example. The sky was shrouded by lightning, and everyone backed away. The battle between the proud nobles in the Holy Ji Palace would have easily affected large areas. The sky was soon turned into a space of lightning. Starlight shimmered around Yi Futian, yet his starry world seemed to be overwhelmed. The god of thunder was about 100 meters tall and looked like a true god. The eyes of the thunder god flashed. It shot a fearsome bolt of lightning, lashing out at Yi Futian. Vroom! The wings of the rock flapped behind Yi Futian as he evaded one attack after another. The lightning above his head kept aiming for him. Yi Futian flew about in dazzling arcs as he evaded the incoming attacks. Lights shimmered within his life palace. The spiritual chi within and about him all turned into power of stars as rustling noises were heard, circling about him and flowing to his polearm of divine destruction. He activated the divine light of the stars, allowing the light of the stars flowing into his weapon to shine increasingly brightly. At that moment, the god of thunder's shadow extended a large palm from behind Yen Xian. It was a strike packed with immeasurable might of lightning, with the swirl of lightning in the palm looking like some terrifying vortex out to kill everything it touched. The palm struck at Yi Futian. The sky seemed to be blocked out as streaks of lightning rained down on him, sealing off the space around him. Out of everyone he could have picked to fight, he had to pick Yen Xian. Many looked on with sarcastic looks. The champion of the battle to enter the Holy Ji Palace was about to learn his first lesson within the palace. Yen Xian entered the Holy Ji Palace as someone who had just broken into Noble Plain back in his day. His talents were incredibly extraordinary, despite being nowhere near as eye-catching as Yi Futian's. The battle between the two was heavily in Yen Xian's favor, so much so that it was impossible for Yi Futian to come out on top, for no other reason than Yen Xian was on a way higher plane than Yi Futian. Yi Futian's spiraling body seemed to be trying to escape, yet the palm continued to smack at him, and Yi Futian seemed to be smacked soon enough. However, Yi Futian flew in an arc, turning around to ride the lightning as he blitzed across the air, heading in Yen Xian's direction. The lightning bolts that were raining down hit Yi Futian squarely, yet the glittering screen of starlight protected him. Cracks appeared and the screen gradually shattered, but Yi Futian was about to escape the attack range of the palm and get close to Yen Xian. Humph, Yen Xian smirked. The tall god of thunder lifted the thunder hammer high and brought it down on Yi Futian. The strike seemed to be one out to kill everything in its path. At that very second, the polearm of divine destruction in Yi Futian's hand lashed out. The ritual implement turned into a 100-meter-long staff, breathing starlight. The starry world around him turned even brighter, circling around the polearm of divine destruction. A force capable of cleaving heaven and earth seemed to be born. Even spectators who were watching from afar were able to feel the formless pressure bearing on them. That is one horrifying ritual implement. He was hiding it all along. The color of some people's faces changed. Be careful, the girl reminded. Futian hid the true might of the polearm of divine destruction before, making everyone think that it was a usual sage ritual implement. Its true might burst suddenly as stars glittered in the air. The implement brought the full brunt of the starry world upon its surrounding environment. It exuded an extremely unbearable pressure. It was as if the stars had all come down on one's shoulders. The weapon clashed with the thunder hammer. Rumbling noises were heard and storms whipped up in the air. Stars fell one by one in the starry world, turning into forces of immeasurable magnitude as they crashed down. Many saw the thunder hammer being thrown back, while the polearm continued its course downward. Yen Xian's expression finally changed. He shouted and the god of thunder took one step forward, blocking his body. When the polearm struck, it landed squarely within the shadow of the god of thunder, cracking its gigantic body. Pooh! Yen Xian spat up blood and the shadow disappeared altogether. Futian turned into a bolt of lightning as he lashed out. Yen Xian felt a staff land on his body before he was able to recover. While the force of the incoming staff was nothing like before, it was nonetheless enough to send him flying, dropping him to the ground spewing blood. Yen Xian's face turned incredibly pale. He had intended to teach that so-called champion newbie a lesson in front of everyone, yet he ended up being the one getting beaten and injured. Just what was that thing packing so much power? Are you alright, senior? A figure came beside Yen Xian, and it was none other than Futian. Sincere concern was seen from his clear eyes. Was I going too far? Futian added as Yen Xian continued his silent. I'm sorry, senior. Had I known it would turn out like this, I wouldn't have used my full power. I'll go easier on you next time. PFFTT. Yen Xian spit up blood again, and his face turned even paler. Everyone around looked at Futian dumbfounded. Do you really have to add insult to injury? Just how shameless can you be? What will you have Yen Xian do from here on out? Get out of my sight, Yen Xian said coldly. Thank you, senior, Futian said with his hands cupped before walking past him and adding in a low voice, how were you unable to take even one hit? Were you going easy on me? He walked in the direction of the sky-reaching tower as he finished, leaving everyone standing dumbfounded where they were. Everyone was speechless. Yen Xian was so enraged that he shook all over. Many looked at him with eyes full of sympathy. While it was a common occurrence for one to lose a battle, the humiliating loss coupled with Futian's words made it unbearable for Yen Xian. You have great strength, so why be so despicable? Chapter 591, The sky-reaching tower glittered golden lights. Its golden dazzling sheen flowed from top to bottom and spread out to all corners. Futian was able to feel the immense pressure bearing down on him by simply standing at the edge of its vicinity. It was especially so when the golden sheen passed by his body. It felt as if magnificent energies were wandering about him. The sky-reaching tower glittered golden lights. Its golden dazzling sheen flowed from top to bottom and spread out to all corners. Futian was able to feel the immense pressure bearing down on him by simply standing at the edge of its vicinity. It was especially so when the golden sheen passed by his body. It felt as if magnificent energies were wandering about him. The law power zone consisted of ruins bearing powers of 6 elements, except for metal element. It was thought that metal element worked in synchronization with the tower, allowing one to develop comprehension of metal elemental will and temper one's body just by being around it. The base of the tower was open all day long. Every single door felt as if it were a cavern. A figure was seen standing right before Futian, who smiled as Futian walked in the tower's direction. Brother Qi Jia, Futian called. You are quite something yourself, little brother. You'll be famous here soon enough, Qi Jie said with a smile, thinking that Yi Futian was indeed the champion of the law battles, bullying his seniors as soon as he made himself comfortable with the place and all. He used to hear that newbies were the ones being bullied. I'm afraid the correct word would be notorious instead. Yi Futian shrugged, not caring whether he was famous or notorious. He was new to the palace and his plane was low. He joked around and used tricks to save himself from trouble. While many were dissatisfied as to how he behaved in his first ever battle inside the palace, there was hardly anyone who bothered trying to understand what he was going through. Having a noble at the top of her plane out for his head, and then being surrounded by a group of middle-grade nobles was no pleasant experience. He did not find it feasible to just protest the indignation he suffered and fight his way out to show how noble he was as a person. If he had lost that very first battle, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Despite having won his battle in the palace, he was humiliated all the same. His title as the champion was thought to be a joke of some kind. If whacking each and every one of those who bullied him had been a doable solution, he would not have bothered saying much to them. What mattered most to him at the moment was that he train and improve his powers. Reputation was hardly a concern in comparison. During his travels on the Holy Road and the battles for entry into the Holy Ji Palace, he had endured all sorts of humiliation. However, no one was able to say or do anything once he came out on top. If there were to be a day where he ranked first on the law rank and gained entry to the Sage Palace, there would be no place for anyone to doubt his abilities. Your reputation will improve when you are able to beat all of them. Qi Jie smiled and added, "Oh right, that girl back then was Xiang Zhiqin, a student of Sage Daozong. She has a high status, a princess of the Xiang kingdom who emerged from State Road. Isn't she pretty?" Yi Futian frowned at Qi Jie. Is this guy really a monk? Poison coated with sugar, I'd say. I have no care for external beauty anyway, Yi Futian said plainly. While Xiang Zhiqin was indeed a beauty, he found her domineering personality repulsive. You will be good friends with the Buddha, little brother, Qi Jie said with a smile. So what are you doing here, senior? Yi Futian stepped into the tower. Intense and terrifying pressure was felt welling up from below. Yi Futian lifted his head to look at the top side of the tower while he was inside. There were 18 floors, and alcoves were found at the edge of every single floor. Many were seen sitting inside to train. The ones who are here most often are the people from the Battle Sage Palace, as this tower allows them to temper their physical bodies to further their martial arts, while at the same time train to develop their spiritual energies. There are 18 floors to the tower. How about you try and see how many floors you can go up? Qi Jie elaborated. Will do. Yi Futian nodded. Yu Sheng, Yi Shaoshi, and Yuan Zhan were all training on the floors above. Is the pressure at the top floor the strongest? He asked. Indeed. You'll understand once you've experienced it yourself. Students of the Battle Sage Palace are all required to make it to the 18th floor before their teachers impart arts of the highest level for tempering their bodies, Qi Jie explained. Understood, brother Qi Jie. I'll go train now. Yi Futian went straight for the first floor and found an empty spot. He sat down and within mere moments, golden sheens slithered about his body. He came to feel as if he was shouldering a tower and felt overwhelmed. The golden sheen seemed to pack fearsome penetration powers, hitting his body and making him feel as if he was being beaten up. The tremendous pressure permeated every inch of his body, making him feel as if he was being squeezed all over. I didn't expect the pressure of the very first floor to be this strong, Yi Futian murmured to himself. After experiencing the pressure for some time, he went to the second floor, then the third, fourth, and so on. When he reached the 7th floor, he was able to feel terrifying forces bearing not just on his body, but also his mind. That feeling was indescribable. It was as if his very soul was being pressed down upon. Endless lights poured down, tearing away at both his body and soul. Within brief moments, Yi Futian felt as if he was riddled in holes, his muscles torn all over, and his bones shattered completely. He was able to endure the pain for 1 hour before he had to leave the 7th floor. His body felt as if it no longer belonged to him, as if his will was forcefully torn away from his body. I can't believe Yusheng actually made it to the 9th floor. Yi Futian looked up and saw both Yi Shaoshi and Yuan Zhan at the 8th floor, but they had been training there for some time which Yi Futian had been spending in that world of ice. After taking some rest, Yi Futian felt that his body was ready again. He then went up to the 7th floor, acclimatizing himself to the pressure. He felt as if something was calling out to him from within, yet at other times, shimmering lights permeating his body from top to bottom. It was like he was shouldering a tower. If one's body was weak, one could not withstand such pressure, and the same could be said if one's will was weak as well. After some time, a figure approached Yi Futian and said plainly, "Are you that champion who beat Yan Xian with one whack with the staff?" "Just luck, and mostly thanks to the power of the ritual implement." "Hardly worth mentioning." Yi Futian opened his eyes. The one before him was dumbfounded. It was rumored that Yi Futian was a vile creature, yet he behaved completely otherwise instead. Before the figure was able to say anything further, Yi Futian added, "I admit defeat." The figure stared at him stunned, before shaking their head and leaving with a smile. "This is boring indeed." Throughout the days Yi Futian spent training in the tower, there were several people who came looking for him. He replied to them the same way he did the first person he spoke to in the tower. Yi Futian was no longer seen in the tower after a while, as he went to the law power zone. It was as he expected. The reputation of the champion was not good within the palace. Contrary to his reputation, however, his rank on the law rank rose instead. He was then ranked 97th, right behind Yun Feng. Daozang Palace, the Holy Ji Palace. Many students came before the majestic ancient temple. The proud students of the Daozang Palace all stopped training and returned to the palace itself. Sage Daozang personally lecturing that day to answer questions of the ones studying in the Daozang Palace and to impart ways to train. It was a rare opportunity, something that only happened several times a year. It was only natural for the students of Daozang Palace to cherish such rare events. Furthermore, Sage Daozang was the one to give the most number of lectures out of all the lords from the 6 palaces and pavilions, and the students of Daozang Palace were also the most numerous. Hundreds flocked to the majestic ancient temple, and things looked marvelous. There were also students from other pavilions and palaces to join the lecture. Daozang Palace did not mind their presence, as all members of the Holy Ji Palace were welcomed. There were 2 figures seated on their cushions silently. The 2 came earlier and as such, were able to sit at the fore. Most looked at them with eyes of adoration. Those 2 were none other than the new students of the Daozang Palace, Hua Jieyu and Phoenix. Both figures shared 2 things in common: both were hard-working in their training and both looked stunning. While Daozang Palace had always been known for their number of beauties, there were not many. There were 4 top-class beauties among the ones personally taught by the palace lord. Other than the 2 newbies, there were also Yun Shuisheng and Xiang Zhiqin. Of the 4, Hua Jieyu was most deemed the most perfect, for behaving like a fairy and seeming to embody all that was beautiful about the world. Phoenix exuded extraordinary elegance as if she was not of this world, clean and free from all that was unsightly about the world. Yun Shuisheng was the cool beauty of the palace, and also one deemed to be worshipped. Xiang Zhiqin was beautiful and elegant, with looks on par with the other 3. Most deemed the 4 to be the most beautiful sight the Daozang Palace had to offer. As such, it was a tremendously beautiful thing for all 4 of them to be present at one place. There was also one spot flocked to by many. A figure was seen sitting there and painting earnestly, a figure named Yun Feng. He drew very slowly and spared glances at the 2 figures in front of him occasionally. Many surrounded him and watched the 2 he was drawing come to life on paper. He was only drawing their faces from the side, but it proved more than enough to tug the heartstrings of many. The painting seems to be imbued with the natural prowess of the gods, and it looks like a dream. Yun Feng's mastery of the arts is indeed impeccable, and he will become yet another famous painter one day. Yun Sheng, rumor has it that you already have Sister Yun and Sister Xiang in your paintings. Are you adding the painting of Hua Jieyu and Phoenix to your collection as well? Someone asked with a smile from the side. They are both angels in the mortal world. If I would have them both in painting, they would become even more perfect, free from all forms of dirt from the mortal world, Yun Feng answered with a smile. He put his brush down and looked at his work, finding it satisfactory. Is that dirt you mentioned referring to Yi Futian? Someone else asked. Yun Feng stayed silent but seemed to have admitted to it nonetheless. Someone cast their gaze to the side. Yun Shuixing was seen there as well, looking pure and stunning. They found it hard to believe that such a woman had been defiled by Yi Futian. They came to know what Hua Jieyu looked like, and that she was indeed one of the top beauties in Daozang Palace. They were unable to believe Yi Futian would defile Sister Yun despite having one such girlfriend himself. It was only natural that students of Daozang Palace had a very low opinion of him. That guy is simply lower than trash. How can he do such a thing to Sister Yun? How could he when he has a girlfriend like Hua Jieyu? Hua Jieyu was seen standing up slowly at that very moment, before turning around and walking in Yun Feng's direction. Her eyes fell onto the painting, and she asked, "Do you mind destroying it?" "How could I possibly destroy such a masterpiece?" Yun Feng answered. Hua Jieyu spared a glance at him and added, "Allow me, then." She fixed her gaze on the painting. Flames jumped on the paper in mere moments, burning it to nothing. Many turned to look at Hua Jieyu. She really gives respect to no one, indeed. Yun Feng was still considered famous in Daozang Palace, and his seniors were good friends with Sage Daozang himself. "Do you really have to go this far? Even if you destroy it, what makes you think I wouldn't just paint another one?" Yun Feng asked Hua Jieyu with a smile. "I'll destroy however many you paint." Hua Jieyu looked at Yun Feng, yet her smiling eyes carried a tinge of coldness. It was obvious that she minded his actions a lot, and it displeased her immensely. Yun Feng looked at Hua Jieyu and recalled a young man he saw on the lower rank. "Is it because of Yi Futian? Do you really have to, little sister?" Xiang Zhiqin walked in their direction and turned her eyes to Hua Jieyu. "While that person has immense talent, he has little to offer in the way of propriety. He is little more than a despicable mongrel, and definitely not one to be bothered with. That has nothing to do with you." Hua Jieyu turned to look at Xiang Zhiqin, and her expression turned fierce and unwavering. Throughout the days she spent training in Daozang Palace in solace, she heard many bad things about Yi Futian. While gossip was indeed a fearful thing, one had no control over what others talked about. However, she was not about to tolerate others doing the same right in front of her, whoever they may have been. Sparks flew between the two as they locked their eyes at each other in such a sacred place. Chapter 592. Everyone at the Daozang Palace wore tense expressions on their faces. Two beauties of the Daozang Palace were actually at odds with each other over what Yi Futian had said. Everyone at the Daozang Palace wore tense expressions on their faces. Two beauties of the Daozang Palace were actually at odds with each other over what Yi Futian had said. Many were actually a little envious of Yi Futian, who had ranked first in the law battle and had garnered a bad reputation for himself. It made people somewhat jealous to see how protective Hua Jieyu was over him. But Yi Futian had also been that beast who had insulted older sister Yun. "Younger sister, Zhiqin only meant you well. Why act this way?" Yun Feng piped up from the side, breaking the tension between the two. Xiang Zhiqin smiled snidely. Since Hua Jieyu liked Yi Futian, there was nothing she could do about it anyway. "I just feel sorry for you, younger sister," Xiang Zhiqin spoke calmly. Insulting older sister Yun, launching a sneak attack during someone else's challenge. With such behavior, it's better that you take note of it in future, younger sister. Hua Jieyu looked at Xiang Zhiqin. There had been much discussion over Yi Futian in the Daozang Palace. Having paid attention to what was being said about him, Hua Jieyu was not surprised by what Xiang Zhiqin had just said. Hua Jieyu walked over to Yun Shuixing. Looking down at her, she spoke, "Older sister Yun, I don't know what caused the misunderstanding between the two of you, but I hope you can understand how he might feel being hunted down by a senior of your cultivations and plane. If he has done anything to offend you, I apologize on his behalf and ask for your forgiveness. But I assure you, he is definitely not what you think he is, older sister. Yun Shuisheng looked up at the startlingly beautiful face. She had been training in seclusion at the cold pond all this while and had no idea what was happening in the outside world. It was only after returning to the Daozang Palace that she learned that the man who had belittled her was actually the top disciple amongst those who had just entered the palace. Furthermore, she was shocked upon hearing that Hua Jieyu was his girlfriend, and it hit her that the events of that day might have indeed been a misunderstanding. But even if it was a misunderstanding, it was insulting to have been embraced by a man like that. That was why she had persistently pursued Yi Futian the other day. Thinking about that incident made feelings of indignation rise in her. But as Yi Futian was a disciple of the Holy Ji Palace, after all, there was nothing she could really do to him anyway. Besides, Hua Jieyu was a junior of hers, too. As such, Yun Shuisheng replied, if he can make a public apology to clear the air, I'll let this incident go. Thank you, older sister. Hua Jieyu smiled at Yun Shuisheng before her gaze turned once again to Xiang Zhiqin. As for those supposed challenges, the disciples of the Holy Ji Palace are all amazing characters in their own right. If a group of people of a high plane was to surround a grade 9 noble who had just entered the palace, demand that he entertains their challenges and smear doubt over the integrity of his conduct, then I think those people should reflect on their own behavior first. That's enough, a calm voice rang out. The owner of the voice sat quietly on a praying mat before them. He was clothed in white robes that billowed onto the floor, with a guqin in front of him. Just the outline of his figure alone belied an incredible aura that was like none other. You're new to the palace, younger sister, so perhaps you're not too aware of the culture here, the man said. He turned to the side and said, just as you've said, the disciples of the Holy Ji Palace are all amazing in their own right. That's why it isn't that much of a humiliation to lose in a normal challenge due to being of a lower plane. One can always train and participate in a rematch. In a way, this is how disciples of the palace motivate each other to train harder. Everyone who has entered the palace, even those at the top of the ranks, have all been met with similar setbacks before. Yi Futian's actions are understandable, but as the top disciple amongst the newcomers and as one whose name entered the lower rank upon entering the palace, he's seen as someone special. As such, people will naturally be more critical towards whatever he does. Zhiqin was speaking out of good intentions. The man's voice was gentle, and there seemed to be a mystical quality to it that made his words especially convincing. As for Zhiqin, he continued, some of the things she said were indeed out of line. Let's not pursue this matter any further. Many of the Daozang Palace disciples were gazing at the figure. His face was turned to the side as he continued staring ahead. Since Senior has spoken, I will speak no further, Xiang Zhiqin responded. Hua Jieyu threw a glance. She was still somewhat unhappy, but she did not put up any further resistance and returned to her own seat. There was nothing she could do to change the thoughts of others, but time would reveal all. Older brother Lian really is outstanding, people commented as they looked over at the man who had spoken. That man was Lian Yuqing, a musical sorcerer who was the successor that would inherit the guqin techniques. He was the strongest among the nobles in the Daozang Palace and was ranked 5th in the lower rank. Both Lian Yuqing and Yun Shuisheng were two of the strongest nobles in the Daozang Palace. Many people knew that Lian Yuqing's goal was to catch up with Bai Luli, who was 10th in the Baron Sky ranking. As much as the law rank was nicknamed the Mini Baron Sky ranking, in reality, there was still a huge gap in the abilities of those in the different rankings. Suddenly, several people could be seen walking towards everyone from afar. Instantly, the disciples got up in a flurry and bowed. The man at the head of the party was Sage Daozang himself. He was the sole reason why hundreds of disciples had gathered here. They were all here to learn from him. Sage Daozang's knowledge was vast, and of the 6 palace lords, he was the most well-rounded. As such, many cultivators of different professions were willing to learn from him. These included people like musical sorcerers and painters, among many others. Under the guidance of Sage Daozang, they could ask him questions they had during the cultivation process and seek clarity through his answers. Completely unaware of the conflict happening within the Daozang Palace, Yi Futian was still intent on training in the law power zone of the Holy Ji Palace. a canyon lay along the southern area of the Law Power Zone. The canyon brimmed with a frightening dark gray energy, which turned out to be a hurricane that tore apart everything within range. This area was an incredibly barren one, and it seemed as if the vast raging hurricane was in the canyon. At this very moment, a person sat cross-legged in the midst of the hurricane, allowing the roaring winds to slice across his body, tearing his top and slashing through his flesh like unforgivingly sharp blades. His body was riddled with thread-thin, bloody cuts left by the winds, and traces of wounds that had been healed over could be seen as well. Futian had truly experienced the savage violence of the hurricane within this area. Wind intent at its mightiest manifested in a powerful attacking force that was like a blade, stabbing at every part of Futian it could reach and harboring an intense energy that tore apart everything in its way. After a long while, Futian stood up and began walking deeper into the canyon. A month later, Futian appeared within the Earth area that was located in the eastern part of the Law Power Zone. 3 months after that, he set foot into the destructive lightning area, which was also in the same eastern part of the zone. Time flew by in a haze. Spring changed into summer, then into autumn, and in the blink of an eye, it was the end of autumn already. The fire area was a world consumed by flames, emanating frightening destructive energy. Waves of fire currents surged towards Futian and seeped into his body. The flames of this area were incredibly powerful, and the fire currents that had entered Futian's body felt as though they were about to consume everything in their path. Where Futian stood, all was barren and lifeless, having been destroyed by the flames. But one occasionally saw a few cultivators who had come here to train as well. This place looks like a mountain range that has been burned to ashes, Futian thought to himself as he walked towards the center of the fire area. Fire currents that were even more powerful than before came rushing towards him, invading his body and even worming into Futian's mind in an attempt to burn away his will. A rustling sound came from within Futian's life palace. Jade green light flowed along the surface of his body, swallowing up the fire currents that passed through his body bit by bit. Within his life palace, these flame currents shot straight for the world tree life spirit and attached themselves to it in an aggressive attempt to incinerate the life spirit. Come! Just then, a mystical voice rang out inside Futian's head. There seemed to be a special magical quality to the voice as it summoned him. What's that sound? Futian's expression changed. He continued walking, stepping through the sea of flames. A mountain lay ahead, and it seemed like the voice was coming from there. Come over here, that same mystical voice rang out again, guiding him forward. Futian gradually neared the mountain, and the power of the flames grew stronger as well. Don't go any further if you value your life, someone warned from afar, opening their eyes to shoot Futian a calm glance. Futian stopped and turned to look at them, but at that moment a loud bang was heard, and the mountains seemed to have been blown apart. Futian turned his gaze back to see a gigantic divine fire bird before him. That divine fire bird had 3 feet and was as dazzling as the sun itself. It was a divine bird of the sun, the 3-legged golden raven. A streak of fire current energy shot viciously towards Futian. He retreated in a flash, only to feel several 3-legged golden raven shadows rush into his mind in a bid to incinerate him. Using the holy will, Futian kept his will intact and retreated far away before he looked forward again. The mountain was actually a massive matrix, and it was glowing blindingly bright now. The 3-legged golden raven charged again with a roar, but it was sealed by the matrix and could not go any further. It's no wonder that these flames are so wild, given that they were generated because of this 3-legged golden raven. It would be good if I could consume a demonic beast of this level in future, Futian thought to himself. It seemed like he had gotten into some sort of bad habit at the cottage. Futian then thanked the person who had spoken for the reminder. The person did not reply, closing his eyes to continue training. Futian was not bothered by this, and he trained here for a period of time before leaving the place. When Futian returned to the sky-reaching tower once more, Yusheng had already entered the 10th level of the tower already. Futian directly entered the 9th level and endured the incredibly mighty pressure present there. As of now, he had already broken through to a higher plane in terms of sorcery and was nearing the threshold of the next plane in terms of martial arts. After 7 days in the 9th level of the sky-reaching tower, a cracking sound came from Yi Futian's body. A roar emanated from within his body and something seemed to shift about him. Around Yi Futian, an even more powerful streak of martial will glowed. At this moment, Yi Futian had progressed into the 8th grade of the noble plane in terms of martial arts and sorcery. He took in a deep breath before he walked down the tower and exited. Now that Yi Futian had made a breakthrough in his cultivation and had become a grade 8 noble, he could afford to take a 2-day break. He was going to head to the Daozang Palace to see how Jieyu was doing with her own training. Cultivation really is time-consuming, so much time has actually passed. Yi Futian smiled wryly. As one transcended into the higher planes, it took longer to grow one's abilities and break into the next plane. On the way there, many people recognized Yi Futian and looked at him with some interest. This was the newbie who entered the Holy Ji Palace after emerging as the top disciple from the law battle and had immediately raised a furor, attracting a terrible reputation for himself. He had disappeared for months after that, though it was unknown whether or not that was an intentional move to escape the rumors. And now Yi Futian was back. According to rumors, his girlfriend Hua Jieyu had gotten into a conflict with many people at the Daozang Palace, and it was all because of him. Chapter 593, Hundreds of disciples gathered at the sacred ancient temple within the Daozang Palace. Sitting on praying mats, they listened quietly to Sage Daozang as he explained the ways of cultivation. Occasionally, someone would raise a question they had. Hundreds of disciples gathered at the sacred ancient temple within the Daozang Palace. Sitting on praying mats, they listened quietly to Sage Daozang as he explained the ways of cultivation. Occasionally, someone would raise a question they had. Today was coincidentally the day that Sage Daozang gave a lecture. This was the second time this year he was doing it. By now, it was the end of autumn, and there was only one season left before the year ended. As such, it was imperative that one made good use of the remaining time to train as much as they could. At the Holy Ji Palace, it was possible that someone could make a sudden debut at the end of the year and bring about great changes to the law rank. However, it seemed unlikely that anyone within this most recent batch of disciples would stir up that sort of excitement. Yi Futian was the only new disciple whose name had been entered into the law rank, and he was only 97th place within the rankings. After that, he had disappeared completely, gone off somewhere unknown to train his abilities. Yi Futian climbed the stairs to get to the temple, keeping his footsteps light so as to not disrupt the sage's lecture. He threw the crowd a glance, and scanning through the hundreds of disciples present, his gaze landed on Hua Jieyu, who sat at the front. It seemed that she had been one of the earliest to come to the temple, in order to snag a front-row seat. She was training hard indeed. The speakers who lectured at the Holy Ji Palace were not too bothered about disciples from other palaces coming to listen. They were generous in that they did not restrict access to the knowledge they were imparting. Yi Futian sat quietly at the back, preparing to listen quietly for a while. Though Yi Futian had been a disciple of the Holy Ji Palace for quite some time by now, he had been busy with training all this while. He was a disciple of the Battle Sage Palace, but other than the time he set foot there on his first day at the Holy Ji Palace, he had not gone back since then. Yi Futian felt a little guilty. He hadn't even gone to see that teacher of his yet, but it was good that he had come to listen to Sage Daozang give a lecture now. When cultivating, most people seek out high-level techniques and powerful spells, but they often neglect the most basic training. Sage Daozang's voice rang across the room as Yi Futian sat there, listening intently. Sage Daozang continued speaking, his voice calm. Many of the Holy Ji Palace's disciples are incredible characters in their own right. Most are ambitious, and thus intend to learn such techniques and spells. I surmise that there are some who resent me for not imparting powerful techniques and spells. And yet, he continued, the question cultivators usually neglect is, how do two cultivators of the same plane differ so much in ability? For example, disciples of the Holy Ji Palace will always be stronger than ordinary people in the outside world, but those in the law rank completely outshine ordinary disciples of the palace. Is this really a matter of how powerful the techniques and spells one knows is? Many disciples of the palace are incredible in their own right. They definitely have no problems in technique training. The sage carried on, when we started training in our youth, perhaps our seniors had us focus more on basics, like the ability to perceive spiritual chi and our elemental spiritual chi abilities. As time passes, we forget about these things. Yet even at the noble plane, what is required from us is no different from when we were at the start. Even at the same plane, different people can use the same spell to different effect. Why is this so? Someone answered him, some people have stronger spiritual will than others, so there will naturally be a difference in the power of the spell cast. That's right. The sage nodded slightly. It's the same even at the noble plane. What decides the strength of the spell is ultimately still your basics, like how much worldly spiritual chi you can activate to resonate with you and combine into a spell. And all this originates from your own mastery over spiritual energy still. A mark of being at the noble plane is possessing noble will. Spells are but spiritual will. For martial arts cultivators, it's martial will. This all sounds a little abstract. I prefer to imagine them as domains. The cultivations of a sorcerer lie within the domain of spiritual energy. The form in which your spiritual energy manifests to negotiate the worldly spiritual chi of this domain determines the strength and speed of your spell. The effects of even the simplest spell can be maximized in the hands of someone powerful enough to exercise it effectively within the domain of spiritual energy, Sage Daozong declared, and at his words, frightening energy manifested in the room. In the next moment, everyone was transported into an illusion. The world was now consumed by flames. Currents of air flowed through the space, and terrifying fireballs appeared in the sky, descending towards the earth like suns. Many people looked to the sky in shock. They felt as though their bodies were about to be burned up. Then, the suns disappeared in mid-air, and everything returned to normal. Was that a fireball spell? Someone asked weakly. Yes. It was a beginner fire elemental spell, the lowest level fireball spell there is, Sage Daozong replied, nodding. Even when it comes to the same fire element, everyone has a different perception of fire intent, which determines the power of their spell. So, when it comes to training, before you stubbornly focus your attention on powerful techniques and spells, find a way to build up your spiritual energy domain to the best it can be. Then you'll be able to activate stronger worldly spiritual chi for your own use during battle. That's all there is to martial arts. Many people were listening intently to Sage Daozong's words and taking them to heart. Yi Futian nodded at his words. Though the sage was talking about very simple concepts, but normally, not everyone took these concepts seriously. Now that Sage Daozong had pointed these concepts out again, these people would begin to pay them more attention in the future. Back then at the cottage, his teacher had made him learn various kinds of spells and know them by heart. In a way, it was to achieve the same purpose. After you've passed this level, move on to the next one, the sage advised. Use your own perception in the different domains of spiritual will to transcend into yet another domain and attain the power generated from a new spiritual energy domain. Then, use that power to modify spells and even create stronger spells. Some top-notch spells and martial arts techniques are created from the combination of various elemental abilities, and the results are powerful. Of course, this would require cultivators of a high caliber to achieve, and this is what separates the prodigies from mere geniuses. However, there are more people out there who like things ready-made, like you all. It would be nice to just take something as it is to learn, right? Many people laughed at Sage Daozong's words. Indeed, this was what the majority of the crowd was thinking, even the geniuses and the prodigies themselves. Alright, we'll stop here for today, Sage Daozong concluded and stood up, looking at the audience before him. Without question, he saw Yi Futian. With the sage's plane, he had been alerted to Yi Futian's presence when he arrived. With a soft chuckle, Sage Daozong turned to leave. The many disciples in the audience stood up as well. Some were discussing the lecture, internalizing what they had just learned. Every time Sage Daozong gave a lecture, it was always a fruitful learning experience, with many things to become aware of. Jieyu, Yi Futian called out to her mentally. Hua Jieyu was taken aback, before she stood up to look behind her. Upon seeing Yi Futian, a brilliant smile appeared on her face, dazzling those around her. They then saw Hua Jieyu walking quickly and lightly in that direction, pretty as a young fairy. Many eyes followed her as she walked forward, before they realized that Yi Futian was there. Some people recognized Yi Futian, and their expressions darkened. How dare Yi Futian step into the Daozang Palace? Yun Shuisheng was here, and even though Hua Jieyu had spoken up for Yi Futian the other day, he hadn't actually apologized to Yun Shuisheng yet. Why are you here at the Daozang Palace? Hua Jieyu walked up to him and stretched out her hand. Yi Futian took her dainty hand in his and whispered, I missed you. Me too, Hua Jieyu whispered back just as quietly. However, those who were intentionally eavesdropping heard their exchange. They thought about the rumors that surrounded Yi Futian, and their hearts ached even further. Yi Futian had behaved inappropriately towards older sister Yun, and now he even had the cheek to enter the Holy Ji Palace and hold Hua Jieyu's hand, acting all intimate. Oh yeah, about what you did to older sister Yun back then, do you want to apologize to her? She said she wouldn't pursue this matter any further, Hua Jieyu asked Yi Futian, remembering the previous incident. Yun Shuisheng, who was in the crowd, turned to look at Yi Futian as well. The people in between them then quickly dispersed, allowing Yun Shuisheng and Yi Futian to look directly at each other. She should be the one apologizing to me, Yi Futian said grumpily, recalling the memory of that incident. Looking at how intimate Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu were, Yun Shuisheng understood that everything that had happened that day had been a misunderstanding. As such, if Yi Futian was willing to personally clarify his side of the story and apologize to her, then she would have been ready to just let it go. But witnessing Yi Futian's remorseless expression and words made her eyes darken again at how much of an asshole he was. Yi Futian had interrupted Yun Shuisheng training and forcibly taken her away, and now she was to apologize to him? What an arrogant guy, many people thought to themselves. A chill settled upon the space, and Hua Jieyu moved to block Yi Futian from Yun Shuisheng. Older sister Yun, let me persuade him. Hua Jieyu's pretty gaze flicked over to Yi Futian, wondering just what he was doing. She was annoyed that he couldn't just give in for once. Older sister Yun was a pretty girl, after all, it couldn't hurt to give in to her. Don't you like pretty girls? Why can't you just give in this time? Hua Jieyu asked Yi Futian mentally, staring at him. Yi Futian was surprised. Upon seeing the angst in Hua Jieyu's eyes, he understood that Hua Jieyu was only acting in his best interests. Fine, he thought, but only because you asked. I warned you in the past, and yet I got insulted by you. Now you can see it for yourself. Whatever happens between the two of you is none of my business indeed. But the Daozang Palace cannot just ignore what happened to older sister Yun, a voice rang out from beside them. It was Xiang Zhiqin, who was staring coldly at Yi Futian as she spoke. We let you off the last time for insulting older sister Yun. Now that you've entered the Daozang Palace, you should apologize to her. And I've said this before as well, what does this have to do with you? Hua Jieyu shot Xiang Zhiqin a cold stare. Xiang Zhiqin looked at Hua Jieyu once again. It was also after one of Sage Daozang's lectures that she had spoken out of good intentions, only to be insulted by Hua Jieyu. Even older brother Lian Yuqing had stepped in personally, which prompted her to leave things be and not say anything more. Now, it had happened again. On the account of you having just entered the palace and being my junior, I didn't argue further with you last time. Now, I'm pointing out how he has insulted older sister Yun. Who are you to say anything about this? Xiang Zhiqin stared at Hua Jieyu. Months had passed since the last incident, but now, two beautiful women stood before the sacred ancient temple once again, facing each other in a standoff. Yi Futian's eyebrows creased, and his eyes were cold. Hua Jieyu apparently had to endure bullying within the Daozang Palace. Chapter 594, Xiang Zhiqin mentioned having let Jieyu off the previous time. Evidently, this was not the first time this sort of thing had happened. Xiang Zhiqin was a grade 5 noble. Against her, Jieyu was at an obvious disadvantage. Xiang Zhiqin mentioned having let Jieyu off the previous time. Evidently, this was not the first time this sort of thing had happened. Xiang Zhiqin was a grade 5 noble. Against her, Jieyu was at an obvious disadvantage. It looked like there really was a tradition of newcomers being hazed at the Holy Ji Palace. May I ask what your relation to Yun Shuixing is? Walking to Hua Jieyu's side and taking her hand, Yi Futian looked over to Xiang Zhiqin and asked. Xiang Zhiqin shot Yi Futian a glance. She's my senior. Oh, Yi Futian nodded, Jieyu is my girlfriend. If you, a mere junior, can meddle with what happened between me and Yun Shuixing, then why can't Jieyu speak up for me? Are you an idiot? Yi Futian shot at Xiang Zhiqin. Everyone's stares hardened. Yi Futian's words seemed to make some sense. However, in the world of cultivation, it was only one thing to make sense. If Hua Jieyu's plane was higher than Xiang Zhiqin's, then she could have said anything she wanted to, and Xiang Zhiqin would not have dared to do anything about it. However, the situation was that Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu were the weaker ones in this equation. Of course she can, Xiang Zhiqin sneered. If she even wants to battle on your behalf today, that's fine too. So, in the end, you're just lording your seniority over us. Yi Futian chuckled. Well then, let's settle things one by one. As he spoke, he walked towards Yun Shuixing. The people who had gathered close by dispersed, watching Yi Futian. They were wondering what he was going to do. News of how he had insulted Yun Shuixing had spread through the Holy Ji Palace. Yi Futian approached Yun Shuixing, and her cool gaze flickered towards him before he said, let me resolve what happened between the two of us. The misunderstanding from before was my fault from the start. I take responsibility for it. But it was a genuine mistake on my part as well. If you think I did it intentionally, then there isn't much point to an apology. You can do as you like, then. Yun Shuixing looked into Yi Futian's eyes. His gaze was clear and devoid of any frivolity. His expression made it easy for one to believe his words. I believe you, Yun Shuixing replied. That would make things easier, Yi Futian said. When you woke up, I told you it was a misunderstanding and tried to explain. If you had let me do so then, there would have been no problem. Instead, you attacked me immediately without even hearing me out and even said you were going to kill me. Who would have been able to stand that? Furthermore, you chased me all the way to the sky-reaching tower and even wanted to take me away. Many people tried to make me stay then, but how could I be blamed for acting in self-defense? How would I dare to leave with you under that sort of situation? Yun Shuixing did not say anything in response. I understand where you are coming from, Yi Futian continued, but I hope you can do the same for me, too. Whether or not what happened at the cold lake was a misunderstanding, it was my fault. I apologize for what I said at the sky-reaching tower as well, it was uncalled for. It isn't that I am scared of you, I just don't see the need to continuously harp on such a trivial matter, to the point where it even implicates my significant other. You are free to do whatever you want when it comes to me in the future. I'll accept it. But this is purely between the two of us, it has nothing to do with Jieyu, nor does it have anything to do with the Daozang Palace. After speaking his mind, Yi Futian then turned to leave. Watching him walk away, Yun Shuixing spoke up as well, let's put this matter to rest then. Yi Futian stopped at her words and smiled. Then he continued walking forward and approached Xiang Zhiqin. Now that things between me and Yun Shuixing have been cleared up, it's time to settle things between us. You've meddled in our affairs twice by this point, once at the sky-reaching tower, and right now at the Daozang Palace. You're even going as far as to bully my girlfriend. Tell me, how should we settle this? Older sister Yun may have forgiven you, but you're still a despicable man. Sneaking up on Wang Yu, insulting older sister Yun. You're in the law rank, yet you choose to lose by default in order to avoid battles. You seem to not know what shame is. Xiang Zhiqin glared at Yi Futian. She had been taken aback by his question. How did he intend to settle this then? I entered the Holy Ji Palace to train, not to play these silly games with all of you and participate in meaningless challenges. Furthermore, You do things like issuing challenges to those of a lower plane than you and then forcing them to accept it, or imposing your own views on other people. Then you even crow about it like it's something to be proud of. Maybe it's because you've been spoilt rotten as the princess of the Xiang kingdom, that's why you like to force your self-centered beliefs onto others and believe this is something that is natural and acceptable. Yi Futian shot Xiang Zhiqin a cold glance, and said, "Didn't anyone ever tell you that you were being a bitch?" Upon Yi Futian's words, everyone froze and stared at them. If what Yi Futian had said to Yun Shuixing earlier had carried hints of an insult, then this was full-out humiliation. Yi Futian had entered the Daozang Palace and humiliated Xiang Zhiqin in front of everyone. Xiang Zhiqin's expression changed in an instant. She was at a loss at what had just happened. This was the first time anyone had dared to describe her in such insulting terms. The immense pressure of a grade 5 noble began to spread across the space. Xiang Zhiqin's long hair fluttered in the wind, and the elegance of her demeanor was undercut by a cold rage. Everyone present could sense that Xiang Zhiqin had been genuinely angered by Yi Futian's words. At this moment, a man in white robes strode into view. People gave way to him and stared at the figure walking towards Yi Futian and Xiang Zhiqin. It was Lian Yuqing, a disciple of the Daozang Palace, and fifth in the law rank. Lian Yuqing had a guqin in his hands and was charming in his long white robes that went all the way to the floor. Looking at Yi Futian, he spoke, "They say you shouldn't believe everything that you hear. I've heard rumors in the Daozang Palace that the disciple who placed first in the law battle this year was a despicable and shameless person. I always thought that might be an exaggeration, and seeing you come here to the Daozang Palace to apologize to Yun Shuixing and put this matter to rest made me believe in my own judgment even more." Everyone's gaze snapped over to the person who had spoken. It was Yun Feng, who walked out and said, "I don't agree with this person's behavior as well. Since I'm closer to him in terms of ranking, let me take this battle instead." In the law rank, Yun Feng was in the 96th place, while Yi Futian was in the 97th. Previously, Yun Feng had claimed before the law rank that this year's entry battle could be a flop. Evidently, he believed that if he had not entered the palace directly last year and entered the law battle instead, he would have been the most dazzling individual. Younger sister, Lian Yuqing said, "Yun Feng is a grade 6 noble, he's perfect for this. Yi Futian has defeated challengers 2 planes above him to become the champion of the law battle, and furthermore, your rankings in the law rank are close to each other. A challenge like this will not be seen as bullying." Xiang Zhiqin nodded slightly in agreement. Her expression was still cold as she turned to glare at Yi Futian. She had never been insulted like that before. Yun Feng walked forward, and the people around him scrambled to make way for him. Yi Futian nodded at Hua Jieyu, and she retreated as well. The two were to battle on this sacred learning ground. Yun Feng was very young, and he was fair and handsome. Smiling at Yi Futian, he announced, "I'm Yun Feng, a grade 6 noble. I am a painter." Upon finishing his words, a dazzling light shone from behind him and instantly, paintings flew out all around him. It was as if millions of paintings were suspended in the air, with each painting containing immense power within. Yi Futian looked at Yun Feng. Yun Feng's life spirit was similar to that of Yi Futian's fourth older brother's million treasure books. It was very interesting. Looking at the various paintings, Yi Futian's expression suddenly changed. One of the scrolls had an image carved into it. It was a painting of Hua Jieyu. Yun Feng. Hua Jieyu's expression changed as well. Currents of energy rolled off her body, and her eyes were cold. "Please don't take offense, younger sister. You burnt my scrolls previously when I was painting, after all. But this has always been the way of my training. I will incorporate everything that is beautiful and good in this world into my paintings. It is not to target you. I hope you can understand," Yun Feng explained. There were all sorts of painting scrolls behind him, containing images of people, demonic monsters, ritual implements, and many more. Hua Jieyu's face was pale, and she looked at Yi Futian. Yi Futian's expression was equally cold. Suddenly, he rose up into the sky, moving out of the Daozang Palace. Everyone was stunned. Yunfeng followed after him, asking, "What is the meaning of this?" "We'll settle this at the law battle platform," Yi Futian replied coldly. After seeing that painting, he had decided to not battle at the Daozang Palace. Chapter 595, Yi Futian soared through the air above the Daozang Pavilion. Yunfeng chased after him. Yi Futian soared through the air above the Daozang Pavilion. Yunfeng chased after him. Everyone looked at the two figures, something odd flashing past their eyes. Then they shot into the sky too and went over towards the battle area. Even Yun Shuisheng went forward after a moment of hesitation. He wanted to see too. The big group soared through the sky. Many people cultivating in the Holy Ji Palace were shocked when seeing the sight in the air. Was something big happening? Some unrelated people also joined them, making the camp bigger and bigger. Right now, many people were already gathered at the battle area. Just then, many looked up. They saw a group in the air, charging towards the battle platform. Someone will engage in battle. Everyone's eyes flashed. They stepped toward the battle platform. They wondered who would be fighting that would cause such a commotion. That's Yunfeng. He's 96th on the law rank. He's the descendant of the craftsman. The craftsman is good friends with Sage Daozang. Last year, he sent Yunfeng to cultivate under Sage Daozang. His cultivation isn't exactly high in the Holy Ji Palace, but he's very talented. He has the potential to reach the top of the rank. Who's in front of him? Someone asked while walking. Yi Futian, 97th of the law rank. He was number 1 in the entrance battle at the start of the year. Some people's eyes glinted. They looked at the two figures with interest. It would be interesting if two strong cultivators from the rank would fight a law battle. I heard that Yi Futian had a bad reputation after entering the Holy Ji Palace. There are many rumors about him in the Daozang Pavilion. Yunfeng had once drawn a picture of Hua Jieyu, but she burned it. Maybe this angered Yi Futian, so he wants to challenge Yunfeng directly. Everyone discussed this. Soon, many strong cultivators gathered around the battle podium. Yi Futian descended from the air, landing on the podium. Afterward, Yunfeng came down in a beautiful arc. Countless scrolls danced around him. He was extremely brilliant. He floated down and landed on the platform. Various figures flew over and landed around the platform. Just as they'd guessed, the ones who would fight this time were Yunfeng and Yi Futian, 96th and 97th on the law rank respectively. However, Yunfeng should be a grade 6 noble now. Yi Futian had been a grade 9 noble when he'd first entered the pavilion. The people didn't know if he'd improved, but even if he was grade 8, it was still foolish to challenge Yunfeng. Strong cultivators of the Daozang Pavilion arrived gradually. They appeared around the platform and gazed at the two figures there. The platform was very big. It was enough, even for a noble-level battle. People could fight at any time anywhere in the Holy Ji Palace, other than the 6 pavilions, but people still liked to solve their conflicts on the platforms. It was a tradition. Plus, once people stepped onto the platforms, no one from the Holy Ji Palace could interfere. This meant that they could fight however they wished without hurting or disabling anyone. No one could do anything about it. Stepping onto the battle podium was a voluntary thing. One had to pay for the consequences of their choices. When we first met, you said that you were first in the pavilion battle by luck. Now, it seems that it's not the truth, Yunfeng said coolly while looking at Yi Futian. But it doesn't matter if it's the truth. This battle will prove it. You're 97th on the law rank after entering the pavilion. I'd like to see just how strong you are. Yi Futian scanned Yunfeng and said, I'm not interested in people's positions on the law rank. I just know that you'll regret meeting me after this battle. As soon as he finished, a beautiful golden rock appeared. Behind the dazzling wings, rough sounds came from his life palace. Noble will envelop the entire space as spiritual chi rushed towards him. At the same time, powerful spiritual chi gathered into a golden staff. He grasped it and his wings pumped. Yi Futian rose slowly into the air. A starry world appeared around him. Yun Feng stared at Yi Futian. The Yi Futian who'd been known to be lowly and surrender no matter who challenged him seemed to have changed today. He seemed too arrogant to even know his place. Which was his true side? Everyone would know after this battle. His true self would appear after Yun Feng defeated him. An artist is also called a summoner. My life spirit is a picture. Carving thousands of pictures on my life spirit, observing scrolls, and carving scrolls are how I cultivate. Not everyone can enter my scrolls, Yun Feng said coolly. He was clearly talking about Hua Jieyu. This will be the biggest regret of your life. When Yi Futian finished speaking, he stepped forward. I never regret what I do, Yun Feng stated. He waved his hand and countless scrolls started dancing. At the same time, his eyes turned demonic. An extremely terrifying spiritual wind enveloped the sky. All the spiritual chi in the world rushed crazily into those scrolls. These pictures had already been carved. Spiritual chi entering the pictures was his strongest attack. Instantly, all the scrolls dancing in the air floated towards Yi Futian. He was surrounded by scrolls. The various scrolls devoured spiritual chi wildly, exuding shocking auras. All the scrolls seemed to be controlled by Yun Feng's spiritual mind. When Yi Futian was young, he'd met someone who cultivated in art, Zhou Mu. Yun Feng was clearly stronger than Zhou Mu. His life spirit was a picture. All these scrolls were carved in Yun Feng's life spirit. They were similar to spell scrolls. Yun Feng's attacks were like thousands of spell scrolls. However, he must have put in a lot of effort to carve these picture scrolls. Boom, boom, boom. The scrolls floating around Yi Futian dissipated. Horrible demonic roars sounded. The scrolls actually transformed into various terrifying demons in the air. There were dragons, phoenixes, kirins, xuanwes, rocks, elephants and more. They were like a horrible demon army. Many hearts trembled. This was Yun Feng's first time on the battle platform. He'd been quite well known when he'd entered the pavilion last year, but very few people had seen the craftsman's descendant fight. Now that they witnessed it with their own eyes, they were shaken. No wonder he could enter the law rank as a middle-level noble. Everything in the world could enter the pictures. All spells, demons, and ritual implements could be used by the artist. Artists were also summoners. Every demon that appeared in the air was drawn by Yun Feng. They contained his power and possessed his cultivation plane. It was like an army of mid-level noble super demons. Everyone started mourning inwardly for Yi Futian. It would be difficult to defeat Yun Feng. Various spell scrolls appeared around Yi Futian. Spiritual chi rushed into them, filling them with terrifying power. The light of runes shone and destructive power poured out. This was the Void Scroll skill that he'd learned from Bai Zhe. At the moment, Yun Feng's spiritual energy enveloped the entire battlefield. His expression was cold. Hovering in the sky, he waved his hand. The demon army in the sky started charging towards Yi Futian. The entire battle platform shook at that moment. Almost at the same time, the spell scrolls burst with thunder spells. Purple gold lightning instantly filled the sky with destructive light, covering all the demons. They struck the demons. The demons shook, but they still charged downward. They'd come out of the picture scrolls and didn't feel any pain. But just then, a golden figure from the starry world shot forward, charging across the sky. Starry light dazzled around the figure. There was also a shocking windstorm. It became one with the stars, possessing power that could rip apart everything. Many people saw the golden figure flying below the demons, going forward with the starry windstorm. The scene was majestic. A huge elephant stepped down, wanting to push Yi Futian down. However, Yi Futian didn't try dodging it. The destructive starry windstorm moved up. The moment the giant foot was about to stomp on him, the horrible windstorm arrived and tore it apart. Yi Futian continued soaring. He struck with the starry staff, splitting the elephant in half. Like a golden bolt of lightning, he streaked out of the space, charging towards Yunfeng. Yunfeng's expression didn't change. He waved a wand and various scrolls continued to fly out. There were ritual implements carved on the scrolls. Instantly, swords whistled through the sky. These swords were like the sharpest ritual implements and they flew orderly towards Yi Futian. Is it controlled by his mind? Yi Futian's expression was cold. Terrifying cold intent descended. The extremely icy intent enveloped the space, making Yunfeng's mind feel bone-numbing coldness. The sharp swords were covered in frost. They slowed down as if they were affected. Boom! The golden rock flew through the sky, passing between the swords. Then another ritual implement created by a scroll arrived. It was a huge and ancient clock. It crashed down, trying to cage Yi Futian in. Yi Futian didn't stop at all, he continued forward. Seeing the huge clock, he struck with his staff again without hesitation. With a loud ring, countless eardrums trembled while the clock was shattered. Such a strong attack. Countless hearts trembled. Seeing Yi Futian continue forward, Yunfeng furrowed his brows. Whooshes sounded. The scrolls behind him flew forward crazily and many heavy mountains appeared. They crushed downward to squash everything. The body that was like a golden rock charged towards a mountain with the staff in front. The horrible windstorm wrapped around the body and he passed right through the mountain. It was destroyed in an instant. The other scrolls also missed their attacks. Yi Futian was getting closer and closer to Yunfeng. Go! Yunfeng waved his hand. Countless scrolls flew out like pages of an ancient book. There were endless rustles as the scrolls blocked Yunfeng. They covered the entire sky. The spells arrived after that. Horrible pressure weighed down, fiery birds shot out, icy rivers swept downward, and meteorites fell down. 3,000 spells were cast at once, destroying the entire space. Boom! Yi Futian disappeared from the spot. The next moment, he appeared before a scroll attack. His staff swept over and destroyed it. The next moment, he appeared elsewhere. He struck with his staff again and a hole appeared in the sky. He moved towards that hole. The starry world grew more terrifying. A sun and moon hung high in the sky. The sun's fire and the moon's water poured down. Riding the meteorite's windstorm, he fought against the wild law power attacks. They were destroyed continuously, but the starry body seemed undefeatable like a god. His every step seemed to have a unique rhythm that shook the sky. The world and heavens were extremely heavy. These days, he'd traveled the 6 law power zones and had cultivated in the sky-reaching tower. This hadn't been a waste of time. All of his elemental powers had strengthened. His will had strengthened too. Many people discovered with a shock that the various law power attacks towards Yi Futian were either burned by the sun's fiery furnace, frozen by the icy will, or buried by the meteorite windstorm. Even if they reached Yi Futian, they would be torn apart by the windstorm around him. The advancing figure gave everyone a strange feeling. It was as if everything was clearing a path for him. Loud booms sounded continuously. Everything kept getting destroyed. An unstoppable might was born around Yi Futian while the attacking scrolls in the sky seemed to become extremely insignificant. Seeing Yi Futian walk over, Yunfeng's life spirit floated before him. There was a blurry figure drawn on the boundless scroll. It was so big it looked like a god, filled with unparalleled might. This was Yunfeng's final drawing. He'd put all his comprehensions from cultivations into this unclear figure. He imagined it as a top god. Every bit of his improvements and comprehension would strengthen the artistic conception in the picture. Now, he poured his spiritual power into this picture. The figure seemed to come to life. It walked out of the scroll like a looming god. It was filled with extreme power. Is this the Yun family's final picture, the art soul? The figure that walked out of the picture crazily absorbed the spiritual chi in the world. It seemed to have the most perfect body. Apparently, the craftsman had transformed all his comprehensions into this art soul. It was like a true saint. Yun Feng had seen many people stronger than him, even sages. Thus, his art soul also contained unparalleled power. Right now, it raised its huge hand and smashed down at Yi Futian. The palm covered the sky. But Yi Futian continued advancing. Aggressive martial arts will was unleashed. It turned into a horrible force field. Everything around it seemed to be flattened. It was like an emperor. Thud. He took another step and Yun Feng's heart trembled. Then he saw Yi Futian raise his staff. Yi Futian's body seemed to become a boundless shore. A 100-meter-long staff shadow appeared. It smashed down with the power of the world. At that moment, Yi Futian's aura wasn't any weaker than Yun Feng's art soul. There were terrifying rumbles. Everything in the surroundings was destroyed. A regular attack couldn't even get close. When the huge staff came down, the huge arm shattered. Then the head and body were pulverized under the staff too. When the staff fell upon the scroll, it shook. Then with a cough, Yun Feng spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was pale. "You want to draw a god?" Yi Futian walked over. Chapter 596, Lian Yuqing scanned Yi Futian coldly before walking to Yun Feng's side. He stooped down to check Yun Feng's injuries. He discovered that he'd broken many bones. He wasn't disabled but would need to rest for a long while before he could cultivate normally. Lian Yuqing scanned Yi Futian coldly before walking to Yun Feng's side. He stooped down to check Yun Feng's injuries. He discovered that he'd broken many bones. He wasn't disabled but would need to rest for a long while before he could cultivate normally. This was only the physical damage. Lian Yuqing could see from Yun Feng's dazed eyes that his psychological damages were much more painful. This junior brother of his was the craftsman's descendant. He could draw everything and his talent was extraordinary. He'd entered the law rank not long after entering the pavilion, so he was naturally young and vibrant. His goal had always been entering the Holy Sage Pavilion. Lian Yuqing knew what kind of person Yun Feng usually was: proud, fearless, and filled with confidence. But right now, Yun Feng's eyes were empty. The humiliation of this battle had pulverized his confidence and pride, tossing him into a deep abyss. This kind of hit was too cruel for a proud and young talent. It could possibly ruin Yun Feng and make him doubt himself. It would be hard to recover his mindset. This was what cultivators usually described as damage to his principal heart. It would create a huge obstacle to his future cultivation. Raising his head, Lian Yuqing looked coldly at Yi Futian and said, "We are all cultivating in the pavilion. Aren't you a bit too toxic?" He knew that Yi Futian had done it purposely. Otherwise, there was no need to come to this battle platform. "If you aren't blind, then you're an idiot," Yi Futian replied coolly. Anyone could mock others from a moral standpoint. But had Lian Yuqing said anything when Yun Feng had insulted Yi Futian? Had he reprimanded Yun Feng when he drew Hua Jiu? If Yun Feng had drawn Lian Yuqing's girlfriend instead, would he still be so calm? Now that Yun Feng was defeated with humiliation, Yi Futian became the bad guy. Lian Yuqing stared at Yi Futian. Then he stood up and walked towards the battle platform. What is Lian Yuqing going to do? Everyone looked at Lian Yuqing. He was at the peak of the noble plane and was 5th on the law rank. No matter what, he shouldn't be the one going up the platform. Senior brother Lian, Yun Shuixing called. This battle had scared her. Before, she'd always seen Yi Futian with a shameless grin, but today, everyone saw a different Yi Futian. The power he revealed in anger was honestly frightening. He had treated Yun Feng cruelly, but Yun Feng and Xiang Zhiqin had forced him into this. Plus, Hua Jiu had already made it clear that she wouldn't allow Yun Feng to draw her, but he still did it. This was an insult, so Yi Futian's anger was with reason. On the battle platform, Yi Futian had defeated Yun Feng as a grade 8 noble. No matter what, Lian Yuqing had no reason to fight. It damaged his image. "I won't do anything to him," Lian Yuqing said softly as he stopped. Then he continued towards the platform. Yi Futian looked at Lian Yuqing. He hadn't expected for Lian Yuqing to be shameless enough to walk onto the platform. I shouldn't fight, but you're too violent. You should listen to this musical piece, Lian Yuqing said. Then he sat onto the platform and strummed his guqin. A graceful melody streamed out instantly, floating into everyone's ears. Then I'll listen to your song. Yi Futian stood there and watched Lian Yuqing quietly. The other was a top noble. This kind of fight had no suspense at all, he wouldn't even try. The higher the plane, the bigger the differences between each level. How much cultivation did a grade 8 noble need to reach the peak of the noble plane? This distance couldn't be reached so easily. Strands of sound waves passed over, invading Yi Futian's mind. Many people lamented that the newbie who'd placed first in the pavilion battle was stronger than they'd expected. Yunfeng's talent had been recognized by entering the law rank. He'd also cultivated for a while in the Holy Ji Palace. However, his ending was tragic. After returning to the Daozang Pavilion, he'd shut himself in. He must have suffered horrible psychological trauma. He was removed on the law rank while Yi Futian shot up to 81. He was only a grade 8 noble, but he was already 81st. If he reached the mid or top level noble plane, what position would he have on the list? Right then, Yi Futian and Yusheng followed Qi Jia through the dazzling pavilion in the Battle Sage Pavilion. According to Qi Jia, Sage Dozhan, chief of the Battle Sage Pavilion, wanted to see them. Yi Futian saw Sage Dozhan before a golden pavilion. His upper body was bare, revealing bronze muscles. This tall body seemed to be filled with endless power. He didn't release his aura, but just standing there made Yi Futian and Yusheng feel extreme pressure. Yi Futian felt like he was an ant before Sage Dozhan. He could be squashed with a finger. Teacher, Yi Futian is here. Teacher, Yi Futian and Yusheng called at the same. They'd listened to the King Kong sage. Since they'd entered the Battle Sage Pavilion, it wasn't wrong to call Sage Dozhan teacher. Sage Dozhan nodded lightly and gazed at them. I saw at the entrance battle that you two are physically strong. You must have cultivated powerful body-enhancing techniques. However, this comes with the technique. You didn't truly find your potentials and cultivate to the limit. Judging from talent, Yu Sheng is the most suitable for cultivating the body. Unfortunately, you used the wrong method. Very few people can cultivate the body. People like sorcery more. Even in lower planes, they say that sorcerers are stronger than martial arts. Cultivating the body isn't the mainstream either. What do you two think? Sage Dozhan asked. Every cultivator has their own skills. All careers are the same when cultivated to the extreme. It still depends on the person, Yi Futian said. No, they're right, Sage Dozhan said to him. Of course, this is only limited to the lower planes. When you cultivate to a certain level, there are no absolute weaknesses or strengths. For people like you who are skilled in multiple abilities, you naturally have an advantage. Everyone has different views on cultivation, but I believe that cultivating the body is stronger than everything else. It's just that few people can go to the extreme. Yi Futian didn't really agree, but from a certain aspect, Sage Dozhan was right too. If a cultivator couldn't believe in his own cultivation, there was no point. If you doubt me, then let me ask you. If I cultivate my physical body to the extreme and my body is now as strong as any spell of the same plane, how will you attack me? Sage Dozhan asked. Yi Futian started pondering, but Sage Dozhan continued, it's simple. You only need to imagine Yu Sheng. If an attack from someone in the same plane landed on him, would he react? Yi Futian nodded. This was the truth. Someone in the same plane as Yu Sheng wouldn't be able to move him. But it wasn't entirely right, because most attacks were above the attacker's plane. I am 7th on the Barren Sky ranking, but people before me are still unwilling to fight me. Do you know why? Sage Dozhan asked. He seemed extremely confident in his abilities. Yi Futian shook his head. It's because their attacks might not be effective. They must attack multiple times to defeat me. But they're different. If I hit them once, they'll die, Sage Dozhan said. Yi Futian blinked. He suddenly felt that this made sense. It really was a huge advantage. Chapter 597. The Sage Dozhan looked at the two of them and continued speaking. Of course, body refining is not just about training your physical body. At your cultivation level, you should understand that not cultivating your spiritual energy makes you as useful as a disabled person. Apart from that, a body refining cultivator is also useless without speed. Next, I will teach the two of you the incomplete heavenly manual. It is an extremely ruthless body-enhancing technique, but it could also be incomplete, hence I named it the incomplete heavenly manual. The Sage Dozhan looked at the two of them and continued speaking. Of course, body refining is not just about training your physical body. At your cultivation level, you should understand that not cultivating your spiritual energy makes you as useful as a disabled person. Apart from that, a body refining cultivator is also useless without speed. Next, I will teach the two of you the incomplete heavenly manual. It is an extremely ruthless body-enhancing technique, but it could also be incomplete, hence I named it the incomplete heavenly manual. Yi Futian and Yu Sheng listened attentively. They were extremely clear of the benefits and drawbacks of martial arts cultivation. Yu Sheng could be considered a martial arts cultivator with his unparalleled physique. However, he had lost to Su Kei in the palace battle and the reason was obvious. Yi Futian also cultivated in body refining, but he had other aspects of his cultivation to worry about. Although his physique was also overbearing, he had not reached Yu Sheng's level. The Sage Dozhan claimed that he was going to teach them an incomplete manual that was extremely brutal. He wondered how it fared against Yu Sheng's demonic art. I'm telling you all this is to make you understand the strength of body refining. Especially you, Yi Futian. Your cultivation is all over the place, you must be neglecting your body refining. If the two of you do not wish to cultivate this technique, I will teach you other body-enhancing techniques. I want to cultivate in this technique, Yu Sheng said. The more brutal the body-enhancing technique, the stronger its effects would be. Coupled with his demonic art, he wondered how much stronger his physique could get. Master, I also want to try cultivating it, Yi Futian smiled and said. Alright, after you have all cultivated this technique to a certain level, I will teach you a combat technique to complement the body refinement that you have done. The Sage Dozhan continued, now, I will use my spiritual will to transmit the incomplete heavenly manual to both of you. Yi Futian and Yu Sheng nodded, then closed their eyes. Another eye appeared to open between the Sage Dozhan's eyebrows, like a demonic heavenly eye. Following that, a brilliant light shot into Yi Futian and Yu Sheng's brow chakra. In an instant, information flooded into their heads. Yi Futian quietly accepted the technique that appeared in his head. In the shadow of mind, he saw a figure sitting with his knees crossed. A brilliant glow circulated around his body, teaching him how to perform the technique. After a brief moment, Yi Futian opened his eyes and a glint appeared in them. He explained, this technique uses external force to forge the body, converting external force into the body's power. By forging one's body to the limit, they will be able to open the 7-star acupoints. That's right. The Sage Dozhan nodded and continued, the incomplete heavenly manual is extremely brutal because it requires you to constantly break through your body's physical limits until the 7-star acupoints have been opened. When cultivated to the limit, your body will be as strong as a ritual implement. Geniuses' spells may exceed their cultivation level, but if you cultivate the incomplete heavenly manual, your body's strength will also exceed your cultivation level. Moreover, in the Holy Ji Palace, the requirements for cultivating the incomplete heavenly manual are satisfied. The Law Power Zone and the Sky Reaching Tower. Yi Futian said. That's right. The Sage Dozhan nodded again. The two of you have the inborn potential for body refining, so don't waste it. Especially you, Yu Sheng. You are a natural body refining warrior and you have the chance to become a saint through your physique by forging an invincible body. At lower cultivation levels, spells are the strongest, but at higher cultivation levels, the cultivator with the strongest physique will reign supreme. When the two of you step foot in the 18th level of the sky-reaching tower, come find me again. Yes. Yi Futian and Yu Xing nodded, then left. The sage Dozhan had looked for them only to teach them the incomplete heavenly manual. After the two of them had left, the King Kong sage appeared beside the sage Dozhan. He looked at the sage Dozhan and said, "Brother has not paid attention to the battle of the Holy Ji Palace for many years. Why did you take in 2 disciples all of a sudden?" Before this, his brother had also taken in Qi Jia. "It's not like you don't know about Wanxiang's prophecy." The sage Dozhan looked at the King Kong sage and said. "Humph." The King Kong sage huffed angrily and said, "That astrologer is just speaking nonsense. His supposed astrology is just a load of bull. How could he know what the heavens have planned for us and predict the future? Brother, there is no need to pay him any heed. Everything exists for a reason. Since it is there, it has a purpose. The astrologers are able to read the heavens' plans and prophesize, but they do not do so often for fear of their lives. However, their readings are generally likely to come true," the sage Dozhan said. "Brother's cultivation level is stronger than him. What right does he have to be able to predict your future? Moreover, brother is a genius. How can your fate be predestined by the heavens?" The King Kong sage's tone was cold as he questioned. "I naturally will not resign to my fate," the sage Dozhan said indifferently and continued, "My pursuit is to break through to the saint level, but I know the difficulties of that. Perhaps, in the process, there will be a disaster that will befall me. That is nothing to be surprised about since I am unable to avoid it. I will face it calmly. However, Yu Sheng and Yi Futian are outstanding talents, especially Yu Sheng. He was born for body refining. If I am unable to do it, perhaps he will stand a chance." The King Kong sage did not say anything. It was already hard to become a saint. Countless geniuses in the barren state had failed to do it. Moreover, it was even tougher to break through to become a saint through one's physique. Body refining was considered the most rudimentary cultivation method. After Yi Futian and Yu Sheng had obtained the body-enhancing technique from the sage Dozhan, they started their cultivation. Moreover, they already had strong body-refining foundations, and the incomplete heavenly manual could build on their foundation to break through their limits. In the flame zone of the law power zone, 2 figures stood barefoot in the sea of flames. Their feet were in extreme pain as the violent flames burned their bodies. Their skin was crimson, and their bodies looked like they were going to be torn apart. However, they did not use their strength to resist it and used their bodies to experience it. They used the incomplete heavenly manual to induct the power of the flames into their bodies and allow it to forge their bodies. This was what the sage Dozhan meant by extremely brutal. The cultivation of the incomplete heavenly manual required the use of external force to forge one's body. After the cultivation was complete, their bodies would already have been forged thousands of times, so a spell at the same level was nothing to fear. In the lightning zone, they bathed in the countless thunderbolts, allowing the lightning force to strike their bodies wildly, using the lightning to forge their bodies. The lightning circulated on the surface of their bodies and was then inducted into their body, into their flesh. In the storm zone, they withstood the storm's tearing force and even ran against the storm without using any movement techniques, merely going against the wind and using the air pressure to forge their bodies. In the ground zone, giant rocks continually fell down, striking their bodies. They could feel themselves getting closer to their limit step by step, breaking through step by step to withstand even stronger attacks. Their cultivation period was very mundane, but it was fruitful. Yi Futian and Yu Sheng stepped into all the zones of the law power zone to forge their bodies. As times passed, they could feel that their already strong bodies were getting even more frightening. In the future, their ability to withstand attacks would definitely be stronger. However, this cultivation method could only be described as insane. Yi Futian's body experienced countless limitations and he would have to force himself to continue doing so in the future, to allow his body to be brutally injured, to be burned by flames, frozen by ice and torn apart by storms. In the blink of an eye, a few months had passed. Yu Sheng had already secured a spot in the 12th level of the sky-reaching tower. However, Yu Sheng was in extreme pain at that moment. An exceedingly horrifying force crushed down on his body like there were pagodas pressing down on him and smashing his body. Impact sounds could be constantly heard and blood trickled from his mouth, but he clenched his teeth and continued to bear it. The 12th story of the sky-reaching tower, this was a place that only extremely strong middle noble plane cultivators could reach, but here Yu Sheng was, resisting the pressure of the 12th level. Bam, bam, bam. Rays of golden light drilled holes through his body, but he did not give up. He continued to use the incomplete heavenly manual and transferred the force to his legs. Bang! Huge sounds could be heard like something was being punctured. With a psh, Yu Sheng spewed out a mouthful of blood and his legs looked like they were being punctured by waves of force and a horrifying light could be seen at his soul and back. I've succeeded. Yu Sheng walked down the sky-reaching tower and made a mad rush for the exit. The ground started shaking and many people looked at Yu Sheng. What was wrong with this burly guy? At that moment, Yu Sheng launched off the ground with his feet without using any movement techniques. His body flew straight off the ground into the air, like a flash of lightning. Soon, Yu Sheng's body landed from the air onto the ground. With a huge wham, the ground split apart and 2 footprints could be seen. Yu Sheng continued to propel himself into the distance, and many people looked at the figure getting further away curiously. What was up with this guy? A figure shot towards the edge of the Battle Sage Palace and rushed towards the clouds, landing on the Battle Sage Palace. With a huge thud, Yu Sheng landed on the ground and appeared beside a figure. The teenage figure opened his eyes and looked at the person beside him, asking, Yu Sheng, what's up? I opened an acupoint. Yu Sheng looked at Yi Futian and said. How do you feel? A glint appeared in Yi Futian's eyes. The incomplete heavenly manual required a person to open the 7-star acupoints. The strength in my feet has increased exponentially, they have very strong explosive strength now. I don't need to use any movement techniques to jump into the air, but it uses the potential of my body instead. Perhaps, my legs will start to ache not long after. The cultivation of the incomplete heavenly manual is originally detrimental to one's body, however, the opening of the 7-star acupoints is just the start of unlocking one's potential. If there is no need to, do not use it. Only use the explosive power when you really have to, Yi Futian said, smiling. The incomplete heavenly manual had recorded that if all 7-star acupoints were opened, the human body's potential would be stimulated to its limit and they could become a giant and have unparalleled explosive power that could rival a mountain. What are you so excited about? Yi Futian stared at Yu Sheng. It feels fantastic after opening an acupoint. Moreover, the incomplete heavenly manual does not clash with my demonic art and can even complement each other. That was why I wanted to try it out and ended up here, Yu Sheng said. Bragging? Yi Futian glared at him and said. He must have done it on purpose. However, he was also very happy for him. The demonic art could be cultivated in conjunction with the incomplete heavenly manual and the Sage Dojan would teach them another technique in the future. Yu Sheng's body would only become more and more formidable. Seeing Yu Sheng's embarrassed smile, Yi Futian said, Alright, have a break. Go and visit Qingxian, it's coming to the end of the year soon. You're not allowed to cultivate at the end of the year. Alright. Yu Sheng nodded and left. Yi Futian's gaze landed on the distant Holy Ji Palace. How fast it had been, another year was passing. He had heard that the Holy Ji Palace would have a sparring session at the end of the year. At that time, he would be able to see the elites among the noble plane in the Holy Ji Palace. Chapter 598, Yi Futian continued to sit at the edge of the Battle Sage Palace, looking at the distant island city. Yi Futian continued to sit at the edge of the Battle Sage Palace, looking at the distant island city. Yu Sheng had exceptional talent in body refining. The first of the 7-star acupoints he had opened should be the Flirting Star acupoint. Strength filled his legs, causing them to have tremendous explosive power. His body had superhuman speed, and when coupled with movement techniques, he would be exceptionally quick. He closed his eyes and a roaring sound emitted from his body, his bloodstream struck wildly against his body like a dragon and his spiritual qi transformed into a golden rock and struck his body. Emperor Yi Qing's body enhancement technique was different from the incomplete heavenly manual, it imitated the form of demonic beasts. If cultivated to the extreme, he could soar through the skies like a golden rock and shatter the earth like a divine ape. It cultivated speed, strength and other attributes the more demonic beasts he imitated. However, the incomplete heavenly manual would push one's physical body to the limit. The two techniques could be cultivated in conjunction to enhance the other's effects. The blood roared within his body and crackling sounds could be heard from his bones. It was like a divine ape had appeared in his body and was trying to break out. Yi Futian exercised the power to its limit, and a mysterious current flowed through his body. He punched out with his fist and his movements appeared completely instinctive like the law power had become one with his fist. Sunlight sprinkled down, as though he was bathed in the emperor's glow. His physical body was withstanding unbearable pain, as if it was going to be torn apart. However, it was like he did not feel the pain and continued to train his punches. On his body, a holy light shone. Bang! With a crisp sound, like his body had been pierced through, a horrifying light penetrated his body. Yi Futian still acted like he did not feel it and continued punching and forging his body. The banging noises continued and horrifying rays of light penetrated all parts of his body. With a huge roar, he could feel his body expanding and the roar sounded throughout the heavens, as his body was filled with boundless power. Hoo! Yi Futian exhaled and his breath shot through the air like an arrow. His body seemed as if it was made of metal. The gloomy star acupoint of the 7-star acupoints had been opened. Even though he had only opened one acupoint of the incomplete heavenly manual, Yi Futian could feel its strength. If he opened all 7 acupoints, he could indeed do what the Dozhan sage had said and use his physical body to withstand the attacks of other cultivators in the same level as him with no reaction. At that time, using only his body's strength and speed, he could easily crush cultivators on the same level as him. He did not continue to make use of the force and instead sat down to cultivate. Closing his eyes, his mind drifted to his life palace. At that moment, it was dazzling in his life palace. His natal spirit, the world tree, was swaying, its jade-green branches full of life and making rustling sounds. The sun and moon were high up in the sky, the golden rock was shining, the divine ape standing tall, the thunder dragon spiraling. Moreover, the scene in his life palace was scarier now, with the sun spirit's flames being extremely frantic and the moon spirit's cold rays. There was a frigid aura surrounding the area and the space filled with an icy current, originating from the law power zone. In the law power zone, he had used his life spirit to absorb numerous forces into his life palace. The previous time in the Daozang Palace, he had heard Sage Daozang mention in his lecture that different spirit zones could evolve through deeper understanding. Back then, when he learned spells in the cottage, he cultivated in the combination of spells of different elements to form new spells. The strength of those spells was much stronger, and if he could really do what Sage Daozang had mentioned and have a deeper understanding of the spirit zones, the spells created would definitely have horrifying power. The past few days, he not only used the law power zones to forge his body, but he also deciphered the different elements and refined his spiritual energy. Although he believed in the strength of the body enhancement technique, he did not neglect his other abilities. Each ability had its specialty, with his inborn qualifications, he would naturally not give up. The sun's flames drooped down, turning into a furnace. The moon's rays spilled down and the icy current did not evaporate but permeated the furnace drop by drop. The two forces intertwined, but were still distinct, as though they could not coexist. The wood element descended, causing the flames to burn fiercer, appearing eternal. Lightning struck down and Yi Futian walked through all the law power zones, wanting to see if all the elements that he had absorbed would have any change if he used his sun scripture's sun furnace to refine them all. The furnace dimension became exceptionally horrifying, like golden lava had appeared and was flowing around in the furnace like the flames of hell. However, they appeared to lack aggression. Yi Futian felt the forces in the furnace and appeared to have a brainwave. He remembered Xia Ho, who he had met in the Holy Road, and the Holy Fire sect's Xia Ji. They both specialized in flame abilities. Xia Ho's flames of ruin appeared inextinguishable and capable of burning everything, while Xia Ji's flames turned into a dark lotus and contained incredible destructive power. The flames of ruin and the dark lotus flame must have been created by elders. If that was so, why not just create his own flame? Closing his eyes, his spiritual energy entered the furnace, experiencing everything going on inside it. He melded his spiritual energy within to perceive the changes. Time passed by steadily. After a long while, Futian was still sitting cross-legged, but the spiritual qi around him was rampaging. There was an intriguing aura wafting in the air. His spiritual energy resonated with the heavens, and a unique force appeared. A terrifying destructive current appeared in the air and circulated steadily. Following that, wisps of flames appeared in the air. It was a white flame. It did not appear elusive, but flowing. It burned brightly, and soon, the area was full of the flames. Burning sounds could be heard in the air, and the flame had a demonic beauty. Success, Futian mumbled softly. He opened his eyes and stopped controlling his spiritual energy. However, the countless flames continued to burn in the air, getting even more vigorous, as though an inextinguishable flame. Even if nobody controlled the flames, it would not be extinguished until it had burned up all the spiritual qi in the area. This flame is pure and untainted, like a glass lamp. Let's call it the white lustrous flame then, Futian muttered to himself. Everyone's perception was different, so the flame that they created would naturally be different as well. The flames of ruin was a different color from the flame that he had created. Although they both contained inextinguishable might, Futian was naturally not going to name his flame after it. Futian broke into a smile. Although he did not break through his cultivation level in this period of time, he had significant improvement in his body refining and his spells. This year, he had stepped into the noble plane and entered the Holy Ji Palace to cultivate. Although his cultivation level did not improve as rapidly as before, it was still increasing gradually, and he was growing stronger. If this trend continued, he would step into the upper noble plane after 3 to 5 years of cultivating in the Holy Ji Palace, or even be close to the sage plane. Cultivation was the one thing he had never dared to neglect. There were many people waiting for him to become stronger: big brother, second sister, and the rest of his brothers and sisters. They were all waiting for him to grow stronger. His masters and his godfather who had disappeared were also likely waiting for him to become stronger. Standing up, Futian left the place. The 10,006th year of the Divine Prefecture calendar was coming to an end. At the end of every year, many of the Holy Ji Palace's disciples would gather for a sparring session to compare their learnings. Not long after, many of those whose families were in Zhongzhou City would go home to visit their families. In the Divine Prefecture, even to the cultivators, the end of the year was still an important event for them. In the core of the Holy Ji Palace, there was an area with many magnificent towering palaces. At that moment, many people had come to that area for the sparring session. Out of the 3,000 disciples from the 6 palaces, many had stepped foot into the area. They wanted to see how the other Holy Ji Palace disciples were faring. After all, to many of them, even though they were all cultivating in the Holy Ji Palace, they barely met each other, just once a year, and there were many people who did not know each other. Only those elites who had made it into the lower rank were known by all. Even among the elite geniuses of the barren state, there were those who would end up as nobodies in the Holy Ji Palace. At that moment, in a certain location, a group of people was walking on the road, their gazes on the people all around. 1 year passed really fast. I've only raised my cultivation by 1 level this year. Looks like I'll only be able to be an onlooker in this year's sparring session, a teenager said with tones of indolence in his voice. Don't be so humble. The sparring session isn't ranked by battle ability. You can spar in whichever field you want. However, this year's sparring session will still be focusing on those people on the lower rank. After all, they are the group that attracts the most attention, another replied. I've heard that there's a batch of newbies this year who are rather interesting. The first among them is already the 81st on the lower rank and is only a grade 8 noble. Even, Bai Luli's younger brother, Bai Zhe, was dominated by him. It's as if Bai Zhe has no presence in front of him, another voice sounded out from within the group. Even the young masters from the White Cloud City were dominated. This is interesting indeed. What a pity that his cultivation is on the lower side, he probably doesn't have any place in this year's sparring session, someone voiced his opinion while lamenting. The group of people chatted while walking and many people among the crowd watched as they came closer. The disciples from the Holy Sage Pavilion. Many people had glints in their eyes as they thought that. Moreover, the person leading them was Hua Fan, the first on the lower rank. He had already obtained the right to enter the Sage Palace. After he had finished participating in this year's sparring session, he would enter the Sage Palace to cultivate. This year's sparring session was likely to be his last one in the Holy Ji Palace. Many people are discussing you, Hua Fan said to a teen standing beside him. That teen was the second young master of the White Cloud City, Bai Zhe. Bai Zhe's expression was grim. He had initially wanted to brilliantly obtain first in the Holy Ji Palace admission examinations. However, he was brutally defeated by Yi Futian and humiliated in public. Even after he had entered the Sage Palace, he was still criticized by others. After stepping into the Holy Ji Palace, my cultivation level has reached the peak of a grade 7 noble. If he dares to come forth this sparring session, I will challenge him publicly to erase my humiliation, Bai Zhe said coldly. This year, he had had tremendous improvement. I heard that he defeated the Daozang Palace's Yun Feng a few months ago. Previously, Yun Feng was already a grade 6 noble who was on the low rank. You should be more cautious, another person beside him said. A glint appeared in Bai Zhe's eyes. He had previously heard that as well. Yi Futian's reputation after entering the palace was dismal and it was only restored after he had challenged the Daozang Palace's Yun Feng and brutally defeated him. In the past, the person who got first in the Holy Ji Palace admission examination would always enter the Sage Palace. This time, Yi Futian went to the Battle Sage Palace instead. I would really like to meet him, Hua Fan said softly. Chapter 599. There were figures flying successively into the sparring session area. Yi Futian and Yu Sheng had also arrived by then. Their group walked down from the air and landed on the ground. Apart from Yi Futian and Yu Sheng, there was also Yi Shaoshi, Yuan Zhan, and Qi Jia. There were figures flying successively into the sparring session area. Yi Futian and Yu Sheng had also arrived by then. Their group walked down from the air and landed on the ground. Apart from Yi Futian and Yu Sheng, there was also Yi Shaoshi, Yuan Zhan, and Qi Jia. Although the Battle Sage Palace had many disciples, most of them were out cultivating in other areas. Moreover, there were only 4 of Sage Dozhan's disciples who were in the noble plane. Apart from Yi Futian, Yu Sheng, and Qi Jia, there was one other disciple named Do Kun. Will Brother Do Kun be participating in the sparring session? Yi Futian asked Qi Jia. Brother Do Kun has always cultivated in the sky-reaching tower. He's the person in the 18th level, you should have seen that before. He should be here for this time's sparring session. It might even be his last, Qi Jia replied. Is Brother Do Kun a descendant of a master? Yi Futian was curious and asked. Do Kun was rather similar to Sage Dozhan. No, he's from a Do clan in the Barren State. It's a strong clan, Qi Jia replied. Are their life spirits all a Do word? Yi Futian asked curiously again. How do you know? Qi Jia looked at Yi Futian and asked. Even I haven't seen it. Yi Futian smiled and nodded, then looked towards Yu Sheng and asked, do you remember an opponent called Do Kue that you fought during the entrance examination? I remember. Yu Sheng nodded and continued, by borrowing his strength, I was able to break through my cultivation level. Brother Do Kun and that Do Kue should be from the same clan. However, when the people from the Holy Ji Palace asked him whether he wanted to enter the palace to cultivate, Do Kue actually rejected it and claimed that he was only there to experience the strength of the Barren State's geniuses. Otherwise, with his strength, even if he wasn't taken in as master's disciple, he should have been able to enter the Battle Sage Palace, Yi Futian said. The palace is indeed quite boring. Yi Shaoshi muttered, I wonder where fourth and fifth brother have gone adventuring. Yi Shaoshi felt that his life was too pitiful. Back then, he had few opportunities to leave the mountain in the cottage, and he was now sent by second sister to watch over little brother. The life in the Holy Ji Palace was not one that he liked. However, the reason he did not like it was probably because he felt ashamed that he had been overtaken by his little brother. Now, Yi Futian was a direct disciple of Sage Dozhan while he was merely a disciple of the Battle Sage Palace. Sigh. He wondered if it would be a good idea to go out and train himself after this year. I'm also bored. Qi Jia nodded seriously. Seventh brother, the palace is a haven for cultivation, how could you be bored? Yi Futian smiled at Yi Shaoshi and said. If he cultivated diligently, his time would naturally be well spent. The problem was that the fatty was too lazy. At that moment, a figure flew across the air from a short distance away and descended from the sky like a goddess. It was Hua Jieyu. She landed next to Yi Futian and smiled sweetly. Yi Futian walked forward and held her hand. Behind him, Yi Shaoshi smacked his head and thought, of course you're not bored. What a bully. Jieyu, those people aren't harassing you anymore, right? Yi Futian asked. It's gotten much better after that time, but I've been cultivating all this while and haven't had time to care about them. Hua Jieyu smiled and replied, I've improved a lot, you know. Really? Yi Futian blinked and said. I've broken through to a grade 7 noble just a few days ago. Hua Jieyu smiled and told Yi Futian, with a little bit of smugness. Yi Futian did a double take and said, will I lose my standing if I am surpassed by my wife? Hua Jieyu glared at him cutely and said, you need to manage so many different aspects of your cultivation. I am a divine spiritual sorcerer and specialize in cultivating my spiritual energy. As long as I can achieve breakthroughs in my spiritual energy, it's enough. My potential in other elements will improve alongside my spiritual energy. As long as my spiritual energy is strong, I will be strong. Yup, you're definitely the Jieyu I know, Yi Futian smiled and said. Although she said it casually, she probably worked very hard on her cultivation in the Holy Ji Palace. That is but mere mortal beauty. Qi Jia recited a Buddhist scripture at the side. Yi Futian recalled the last time he spoke with him, that fellow did not care about external appearances or mortal beauty. Yeah, it seemed he really did not care. We're arriving soon, Qi Jia said. At that moment, there was a row of statues in front of them, sitting there. Each one of the statues had a mysterious will embedded in them, as though the statues were alive. What are those? Yi Futian asked curiously. Those are just decorations, Qi Jia replied, and they continued walking forward. Walking through a white gate made of stone, they reached a vast empty space where many others were already waiting. How grand! Yi Futian looked around and saw the 9 palaces spreading out in the formation of the 8 trigrams. There were many people standing at the positions of the palaces, and the palace in the center sunk into the ground, creating a battle arena that looked like a valley. Moreover, there was a colossal statue behind all of the 8 palaces, standing tall at tens of meters, like a god. Many people were looking at the 8 statues and could faintly feel a will emitting from the 8 statues, as though they had lives of their own. It was an extremely intriguing feeling. Yi Futian's group continued forward onto the Li position. On the left was the Kun position and the right was the Tsun position. The Ken position was directly in front of them. In the direction of the Ken position, there was a group of people looking toward Yi Futian. Across the air, Yi Futian could feel their frosty gazes. He saw Bai Zhe and Zhuge Xing, the duo who were cultivating Tin the Sage Palace. Apart from them, there were many other people looking at him. The one in the middle had an exceptional aura. With just one gaze, others could already feel how strong he was. Who's the person standing in the middle of the Sage Palace's group? Yi Futian asked Qi Jia softly. Hua Fan. Qi Jia looked forward and replied softly as well. The first on the law rank, Hua Fan. In another direction, many of the Daozang Palace disciples were in the Tsun position. Among them were Lian Yuqing and Yun Feng. Yunfeng's gaze looked towards Yi Futian with malice. These few months, he had been in terrible condition and it had affected his cultivation, causing him to stagnate at his previous cultivation level. All this was thanks to Yi Futian. No trace of Yunfeng's previous arrogance could be seen on his face. His aura had changed after that battle. No longer was there any of his teenage arrogance, it had been replaced by a faint, grim feeling. Yunfeng, at that moment, Lian Yuqing addressed him. Yunfeng looked towards him and heard Lian Yuqing say, "You can choose your sparring partner at will during the sparring session. Since Yi Futian is here as well, challenge him again. Your attainment in art is extraordinary, perhaps you can cause the statues to create images and give you some enlightenment. No matter what, you need to have him as your target and defeat him by any means possible." He could naturally see that after the battle, Yunfeng's cultivation had been affected and needed to be remedied. If that was so, he could only escape the trauma by defeating Yi Futian. Otherwise, he would lose confidence in himself and his will would waver, causing him to face huge difficulties in breaking through his cultivation level. Yunfeng was his little brother and as disciples of Sage Daozong, he did not wish to see Yunfeng collapse under his setback. If he was defeated again, then it could be considered fighting fire with fire. At this point, his situation could not get worse anyways. Yunfeng nodded, but there was no trace of the confidence he had back then. This confidence was essential to every cultivator, or their might would be weaker than their opponent before the battle even started. Beside them, Xiang Zhiqin was also there and she glared at Yi Futian ruthlessly. At that moment, a few figures flew towards Yi Futian. Yi Futian smiled and asked, "Wuchen, how has your cultivation been this past half a year?" "The Sword Palace suits me very well," Yi Wuchen replied. "Is Qinyu doing well?" Yi Futian asked again. "She's doing all right. I often accompany her in her cultivation," Yi Wuchen replied. "That's good." Yi Futian looked at the people beside Yi Wuchen, they were Zui Qianchou and Su Quebec. The few of them were all cultivating in the Sword Palace under the Sword Demon. "I've heard that you're impressive in the Holy Ji Palace." Zui Qianchou smiled and said, "As a newbie, you beat up the palace's seniors?" "I didn't want to," Yi Futian shrugged and replied. "Arrogant." Su Keis looked forward and continued in a quiet voice, "However, you have every right to do so. In the palace, there seems to be a tradition of bullying the newbies. If I had the chance, I would have done so as well." "You've been bullied in the Sword Palace?" Yi Futian smiled at the three of them. "The three people beside you are the combination of the successors of the Baron State's 4 great swordsmen, excluding the Wuji sword. What do you think?" Su Kei said. He was the successor of the Tingxue sword while Zui Qianchou was the successor of the Ghost sword. They could all be considered successors of sword demons. Indeed, apart from the sword Saint Villa's Yen Wuji, the three of them were the successors of the 4 great swordsmen. Had Su Kei's words hinted that they had joined forces? This was interesting. The Tingxue House's killer swordsmen always acted alone. To be forced into joining forces with others probably meant that newbies had it tough no matter which palace they entered. These prideful fellows would evidently not succumb to the pressure. There were a few other people who walked to the elite position where Yi Futian was. Zhongli and Yang Jian were all newbies from their batch, but they had all gathered together. The people from the other positions were all watching this scene with interested expressions. Many people who saw Yi Futian gradually got to know his identity. Standing beside Hua Jieyu, the two of them did in fact look like a well-suited couple. "It seems like the person who got first in this time's admission examination has strong rallying power," someone who was watching commented. Entering the Holy Ji Palace in the same batch, the first among them beat up the palace's seniors and made it to the 81st spot on the lower rank. He will naturally become a benchmark for other new disciples. Moreover, the newbies who entered the Holy Ji Palace must have suffered a lot, someone smiled and said. In reality, the treatment they received was also similar. Under the competitive environment in the Holy Ji Palace, it was perfectly common for battles to happen. However, it seems like those from the Sage Palace have formed their own clique. There were people who looked in the direction of the Futian palace and saw Bai Zhe and Zhuge Xing. They were also new disciples from the current batch, but they had followed Hua Fan here. The first of past batches have always entered the Sage Palace. This trend continued for many years and it has formed a tradition. They will always treat the previous generations first as their benchmark, but it seems that this batch is different. However, Hua Fan must definitely hope that Bai Zhe can take over his position and be superior to Yi Futian, someone in the crowd said. The first ranking on the law rank had been dominated by the Sage Palace for many years. Chapter 600, Holy Sage Pavilion was the best pavilion in the Holy Ji Palace and had a symbolic significance. According to some rumors in the palace at the moment, Bai Luli might have already been chosen as the next lord of Holy Sage Pavilion and he would manage the Holy Ji Palace in the future. Indeed, Holy Ji Palace was already paving the way for him. Holy Sage Pavilion was the best pavilion in the Holy Ji Palace and had a symbolic significance. According to some rumors in the palace at the moment, Bai Luli might have already been chosen as the next lord of Holy Sage Pavilion and he would manage the Holy Ji Palace in the future. Indeed, Holy Ji Palace was already paving the way for him. Hua Fan was ranked first on the law rank and was the most brilliant person after Bai Luli. The Holy Ji Palace similarly had high hopes for him. Shimin Hanjiang was ranked just below Hua Fan. Of course, in his batch, there were also a few others whose talents were no weaker than his. Going further down the rank, it would be Yi Futian's cohort. Although Yi Futian had emerged first in the entrance assessment of the palace, he had entered Battle Sage Palace, while Bai Zhe had entered Holy Sage Pavilion. Hua Fan would therefore clearly hope that Bai Zhe would top the law rank in the future. However, Yi Futian was already stronger than Bai Zhe in the assessment. Moreover, he had defeated Bai Zhe despite being one level lower. Bai Zhe would need to put in much effort to surpass him. No elders would be participating in the year-end sparring session in the Holy Ji Palace. All the disciples here were geniuses and the elders would only occasionally guide them. Most of the time, they would be relying on their own hard work and ability to comprehend new things. The Holy Ji Palace had plenty of cultivation resources. If a disciple had any questions, he could also ask the seniors around. There was no need for the elders to supervise everything. This was meant for noble plain disciples. After they became sages, the Holy Ji Palace would release all restrictions and allow them to do whatever they wanted. Even in the vast barren state, sage plain cultivators would be considered as extremely powerful. They would have a high position in any place. The year-end sparring session was an opportunity for the disciples of the Holy Ji Palace to have friendly fights with and learn from each other. It was a tradition passed down the generations. Therefore, most disciples would participate to see the progress of the others. While the elders of the Holy Ji Palace would not be present, they would also be taking note of the outcome secretly. At the moment, disciples of the Holy Ji Palace were arriving one after another. The appearance of many people had attracted much attention. Clearly, all the disciples would be paying attention to those on the law rank. Suddenly, Hua Fan walked out from the Ken direction and stood in front of everyone else, looking at the rest. His long robes swung in the air and he looked indescribably elegant. It's the end of the year again. Every year, the Holy Ji Palace holds the year-end sparring session to examine the progress everyone's made over the year. Furthermore, you'll be fighting against each other. The session is non-competitive and does not have a ranking. You only need to display your skills casually and there are no rules. Most people should be aware of this, Hua Fan said. It's nice that this year, the Holy Ji Palace has admitted new disciples, which only occurs once every 3 years. We have many new people here. Juniors, you should make use of this opportunity to display your talents and the progress this upcoming year. There were no elders present during the session. Therefore, the first person on the law rank was the natural candidate for the host. After speaking, Hua Fan glanced at Yi Futian's direction. In this snowy world, a silver sword suddenly appeared. The snow was cold, but the sword was colder. 2 of the statues behind the 9 halls diagrams also lit up as though they had felt the power released from Shimin Hanjiang. They started resonating with his power. In an instant, brilliant radiance was released from the two statues and a terrifying beam of light landed on Shimin Hanjiang's body. Then, a two-colored light circled around his body. The light from Shimin Hanjiang's sword was 7 zhang high, so was the freezing radiance around him. It caused the sword qi around him to become stronger and colder. Shimin Hanjiang is already in the upper noble plane. In a few years, he will probably be able to stand at the peak of the noble plane and try to break through into the sage plane. The radiance from both his sword and freezing aura is 7 zhang high, and it's because he is only releasing his aura. If he's at the climax of a fight, it might even go up to 8 zhang high. He is indeed the top performer of the assessment last cohort. Go onto the stage and release your aura. Display your abilities and ask someone to fight. Do you understand? Hua Fan said to Yi Futian. Withdrawing his aura, Shimin Hanjiang walked back to his original position. The radiance on the two statues also died down. A strange expression appeared on Yi Futian's face. Just now, he could clearly feel that the two statues seemed to have turned alive. They actually formed some kind of resonance with the aura from Shimin Hanjiang, who was on the battle platform. The battle platform, 9 halls diagram, and 8 trigrams were indeed placed in special positions. It seemed like the statues and 9 halls diagrams were somehow connected and could sense each other. I understand. Yi Futian nodded. Then let's start properly, Hua Fan said again. However, after he said that, Yi Futian still seemed as if he had not heard anything. Instead of reacting, he only stood quietly there. Yi Futian did not have any other intentions. It was only that he did not want to go onto the stage and perform, at least not now. The sparring session was supposed to be a very casual event. Yi Futian had come here mainly to see how strong the other people of the Holy Ji Palace were and did not really want to display his abilities. Therefore, although he knew that Hua Fan and many others wanted to see him go onto the stage, he still made no moves. He simply did not want to. He did not have to go just because the others wanted him to. When he really wanted to perform, he would naturally walk out. Many people started smiling. The top performer this time was really somewhat interesting. It was no wonder many rumors claimed that he was shameless. Indeed, he would not act logically and did not care about others' feelings at all. Even Hua Fan could not change his decision. Hua Fan did not say anything directly, but he had already hinted something. However, Yi Futian still did not move. Clearly, nobody would think that Yi Futian did not know what was happening. All they could say was that Yi Futian really had a unique personality. Many people from Holy Sage Pavilion frowned and glanced coldly at Yi Futian. Hua Fan was the top in the law rank at the moment and had received a place in Sage Palace. Indeed, he was the best disciple here after Bai Luli. Even Shimin Hanjiang would listen to his orders. On the other hand, the top performer deliberately gave no face to Hua Fan. Suddenly, a person walked out from the Ken direction. It was Bai Zhe. Since Yi Futian did not walk out, he would do it. During the assessment battle, Bai Zhe was badly humiliated. Over several months, he had been putting in his best to cultivate. He knew that Yi Futian must also be becoming stronger, but he still believed in himself. At the very least, he had to try. His brother, Bai Luli, was a saint-to-be, the most talented person in the barren state. Bai Zhe would not allow such a defeat to stay with him. Even if he was to lose again, he would still not give up. The people from White Cloud City had their own pride and they would never think that they were lesser than anyone else. Bai Zhe walked onto the Zhonggong battle platform and glanced at the 8 statues in the air. Then, he released his eye of devastation. At once, the spiritual qi of various elements around him raged and a horrifying artistic conception was born. It was as if all the spiritual qi was being controlled by him at the moment. The statues lit up one after another, and only one of them did not light up. A 7-colored radiance circled around him and it was 4 zhang high. With his current level, it was already very amazing for him to achieve this. Many people seemed to be surprised. He was indeed the second lord of White Cloud City. Bai Zai was not weak, but how about Yi Futian? Bai Zai raised his head. Looking at Yi Futian, who was in the Li direction, he said, "I'm Bai Zai from Holy Sage Pavilion. I would like to challenge Yi Futian from Battle Sage Palace." Since Bai Zai called for a specific opponent, it was already a challenge. Everyone looked at Yi Futian. It was almost certain that this time, the top performer would not be able to avoid the battle. Yi Futian glanced emotionlessly at Bai Zai. He totally disliked Bai Zai, who had invited Hua Jieyu to join Holy Sage Pavilion right before him. "A loser has no right to challenge me," Yi Futian said. Right away, Bai Zai's sharp look froze on the spot and his face darkened rapidly. He wanted to wash his old shame off. However, Yi Futian's words were hitting him directly on his face. Chapter 601, Everyone in the sparring session was stunned. Air. Everyone in the sparring session was stunned. Air. In the crowd, Yun Feng's face was also particularly gloomy. If he also challenged Yi Futian later and received the same reply, he would be stuck in an awkward situation and lose all his face. At the moment, Bai Zai was precisely in an extremely embarrassing spot. He was left on the Zhonggong battle platform just like this. However, he actually could not refute Yi Futian's words. Everyone knew that he had lost to Yi Futian in the assessment battle. It's different today. We have both entered the Holy Ji Palace. This is the sparring session, Bai Zai said coldly. Yi Futian was deliberately humiliating him. Yi Futian glanced at Bai Zai with much contempt. Obviously, he knew that this would cause Bai Zai to feel awkward time, but he couldn't care less about his feelings. In the past, Bai Zai had been acting superior. He had ignored Yi Futian's presence and disgraced Yi Futian openly. Bai Zai was actually correct in some sense. Today was indeed different. In the past, Bai Zai was the second young lord of White Cloud City, a famous genius. He was the most probable candidate for the top performer in the Holy Ji Palace assessment, while Yi Futian was known to none. On the other hand, both of them were Holy Ji Palace disciples at the moment. Bai Zai wanted to regain his glory, but Yi Futian was too busy to play with him. "Precisely because it's the sparring session, I'm not playing such a game with you. Otherwise, you will not receive a second chance after losing again," Yi Futian said emotionlessly. "If one day, your ranking on the law rank is higher than or close to mine, maybe I will consider accepting your challenge. Today, you're far from being a worthy opponent for me." Yi Futian's cold and toneless voice slammed onto Bai Zai's face like a violent slap. In particular, his last line caused Bai Zai's aura to erupt uncontrollably. As the second young lord of White Cloud City, Bai Zai had never been humiliated like this. Above all, he was being shamed before all the other disciples. Everyone present stared at Yi Futian, looking interested. The top performer of the assessment was indeed way too arrogant and everyone was looking forward to his performance. Yet, even when Bai Zai challenged Yi Futian himself, Yi Futian still rejected it straight away. During the sparring session, when someone asks you to have a fight, even if your level is much higher, you should still accept the battle and guide your opponent. This is the whole point of the sparring session, someone from the Ken direction suddenly said. It was a cultivator who had a sharp expression on his face. He looked in Yi Futian's direction and continued coldly, "You have just entered the palace. You are too imperious." The person who just spoke was called Duyu. He was a descendant of an elder from Holy Sage Pavilion and his talents were indeed extraordinary. He had a senior who was in the same generation as the Lord of White Cloud City and they had cultivated in Holy Sage Pavilion together in the past. Yi Futian was the top performer this year and was ranked 81st on the law rank, but he was still just a grade 8 noble, a newcomer. He had rebutted Hua Fan's words just now and also humiliated Bai Zai publicly at the moment. Arrogant, he did not look like a newcomer at all. "It depends on who I am talking to," Yi Futian replied, smiling. Many people looked at Bai Zai with some sympathy. Bai Zai was really unlucky to have such an opponent. Yi Futian had humiliated Bai Zai with every sentence. Bai Zai's face had already turned completely dark. Staring at the people around Yi Futian, he said, you're avoiding the fight, but nobody beside you has beaten me, right? Who wants to accept my challenge? Hearing Bai Zai's words, Yi Futian was somewhat surprised. Bai Zai was really digging his own grave. This being the case, he would allow the second young lord of White Cloud City to remember this day forever. Yu Sheng, be quick and clean, Yi Futian secretly transmitted his voice to Yu Sheng. During the assessment that time, Yu Sheng lost only because Su Ke was able to target his weakness. After entering the Holy Ji Palace, Yi Futian had been noting Yu Sheng's improvement. He would be able to easily deal with Bai Zai. Yu Sheng nodded, after which he flashed and jumped into the air. Then, he landed on the Zhonggong battle platform below. Accompanied by a loud bang, the entire platform vibrated. From just his burly, violent body, everyone could feel how powerful he was. They knew that Yu Sheng had also managed to enter the top 10 in the assessment. Just like Yi Futian, he had entered the Holy Ji Palace when he was only a grade 9 noble. He should not be underestimated. Looking at Yu Sheng's appearance, Bai Zai felt as if he was being targeted by a wild beast. Yu Sheng's huge eyes were extremely cold. He was present when Bai Zai invited Hua Jieyu personally. That time, he had left Bai Zai to Yi Futian. Since he was the one fighting this time, he would, of course, not show any mercy. Bang! Dark golden radiance bloomed. A suit of demonic armor appeared on his body and a pair of demonic wings behind his back. A dark golden demonic halberd condensed in his hand and an extremely violent martial will erupted. The might from his will immediately swept across the entire Zhonggong battle platform. Bai Zai felt that a demon had just appeared before him, waiting for him to surrender himself. Yu Sheng was actually pressuring Bai Zai with martial will. Bai Zai released his life spirit. A terrifying pair of pupils and his spell scroll spirit appeared at the same time. Then, a powerful wave of spiritual will bloomed and the entire place seemed to have turned into a grey world. Yu Sheng felt as though an invisible hand was grabbing him, wanting to drag him into the destructive grey world. In his mind, the pair of grey eye of devastation was causing him to lose himself. Spiritual attacks were most appropriate when fighting against martial arts cultivators. However, at the moment, an illusory, dark gold demon appeared in Yu Sheng's mind, guarding him. His demonic method focused mainly on martial arts, but it also contained a way to train his spiritual energy, namely the demonic meditation. It could allow his spiritual energy to be very stable. Although it contained little damaging abilities, it was sufficient for him to defend against spiritual attacks so that this would at least not become his weakness. Demonic might erupted wildly. Yu Sheng's body seemed to have turned into a black whirlpool, rapidly engulfing all the powers around him. That included the spiritual chi that was controlled by the Eye of Devastation. In the sky above the arena, many dark golden demonic halberds actually appeared. They then charged forcefully towards Bai Zai. Bai Zai raised his head to look at the halberds which had appeared in the sky and his face was only filled with coldness. Was Yu Sheng trying to hurt him with this kind of attack in his eye sorcery zone? Even the speed of the halberd seemed to be restricted. Bai Zai extended his hand. Right away, many frightening golden light runes appeared before him, turning into a defensive screen. When the halberds landed, many violent bangs were produced, but the screen remained intact. As the demonic halberds were falling down, an alarming golden radiance was also flowing on Yu Sheng's body. Many beams of golden light penetrated across his body, all the way to his feet. Immediately, his power shot up again. In the sky, two of the stone statues lit up, one of which was extremely dazzling. Some of the radiance poured down onto Yu Sheng's body and actually became 6 zhang high. What? Some of the cultivators looked at the statues, astonished. The light from the statue glittered, as if it was heavily stimulated. Why would Yu Sheng, a mere grade 8 noble, cause such an intense response? Was his artistic conception of martial arts really this strong? Dong! With a loud bang, Yu Sheng stomped his feet onto the ground and jumped into the air. His demonic wings flapped, and his speed was as quick as lightning. In an instant, his body penetrated across the space. Then he fell down from the sky and stepped towards Bai Zai as if he was a god from the heaven. Yusheng raised his arm and threw out the demonic halberd in his hand in midair. The halberd turned into a striking bolt of lightning and punctured through the air. With a loud bang, the golden light screen below was crushed directly. Bai Zai's face darkened. Yusheng's way of fighting was too domineering. Bai Zai could not move Yusheng at all with his spiritual energy. His Eye of Devastation was useful against spells, but highly ineffective against such a brutal martial arts cultivator. Bai Zai used all his might to stimulate his spell scroll spirit. At once, many spell scrolls flew out from his life spirit, giving birth to a destructive power. It was much stronger than when he fought with Yi Futian. Activating the Almighty Thunder Guide, countless chains of Thunder God immediately appeared on Yusheng's body. At the same time, many spell scrolls circled around him, wildly devouring the spiritual chi in the sky. Many storms bloomed, and a golden lotus was being born. Bai Zai extended his hand. The roaring, golden storms converged together, forming a destructive golden lotus which had 81 petals. The petals of the lotus rotated wildly, destroying everything around them like sharp blades. Die! Bai Zai roared coldly in his mind. The deadly golden lotus charged towards Yusheng, who was coming towards him from the air. After being defeated by Yi Futian last time in just one strike, he was motivated by the bitter experience. In the end, he finally managed to learn this combined spell whose power was simply calamitous. Bang! Two brilliant beams of light erupted from Yusheng's feet as he continued coming down. His dark golden, demonic body seemed to have become even more intimidating, and he stepped towards the destructive lotus. Is he mad? Many people were bewildered. Yusheng was trying to kill himself. Was he going to take such a horrifying spell with his body? Even if he had entered Battle Sage Palace and was learning body-enhancing techniques from Sage Dojan, he should not be so crazy. After all, Bai Zai was powerful, and this particular spell was even more hair-raising. You're the one who's trying to kill yourself. Bai Zai thought as he stared at Yusheng, who was in the air. Then, Yusheng stepped onto the destructive lotus directly. An ear-piercing noise erupted, followed by a loud bang. A godlike figure continued stamping down, and it was none other than Yusheng. Although the dark golden armor on his body had already shattered, he had survived the attack from the golden lotus. Chapter 602, Bai Zai's body was carried out on a stretcher. Many had learned of him before he went to study in the palace, and that was due to him having a brother of unparalleled talent. It was even rumored that his brother was to be made the successor of the Holy Ji Palace itself. Bai Zai's body was carried out on a stretcher. Many had learned of him before he went to study in the palace, and that was due to him having a brother of unparalleled talent. It was even rumored that his brother was to be made the successor of the Holy Ji Palace itself. Many thought that while Bai Zai would not have been able to achieve what his brother was capable of, he would have at least become some important figure known by all. No one expected that he would have been beaten and humiliated by Yi Futian during the battles to qualify them for entrance. Worse still, he ended up being walked over by Yusheng in his sparring session in his very first year entering the palace. Bai Zai's reputation was practically in the gutter. Bai Zai found it difficult to live with dignity inside the Holy Ji Palace. Those two battles were simply too intense, especially the sparring session. He was practically being slaughtered. If Yusheng's plane was higher than Bai Zai's, that would have been seen simply as the natural course of things, as it was normal to be bullied by one of a higher level. There would have been nothing humiliating about his loss if not for the fact that Yusheng was the one with a lower plane. That battle was simply too brutal for Bai Zai in more ways than one. Many from the Holy Sage Pavilion felt rather uneasy at everything that took place. Even Hua Fan thought they had taken it too far, judging by how badly battered Bai Zai ended up. Yi Futian and Yusheng held nothing back in ridiculing Bai Zai, which was more than enough to crush his pride and destroy his confidence. However one would have put it, Bai Zai was still Bai Luli's biological brother. Futian and Yusheng simply did not give any face to Bai Luli or the Holy Sage Pavilion when they went about pounding Bai Zai. But then again, Yu Xing's strength was indisputable. He was thought to have been trained in Sage Dozhan's art at body refinement, as he sported appallingly powerful constitution. That, coupled with his own training in demonic arts, practically made him a devil. Many were astonished by what Yu Sheng was capable of. From the looks of things, the second most powerful among the newly added students was not Bai Zhe, it was Yu Sheng. It was the first time that a disciple of the Holy Sage Pavilion ended up completely overwhelmed by a disciple of the Battle Sage Palace. With Yi Futian and Yu Sheng both studying in the Battle Sage Palace, the upper ranks of the law rank would probably end up being bagged by the Battle Sage Palace. It was a situation that could have been overturned by the Holy Sage Pavilion if someone from there turned out to be some tremendous genius. That one battle allowed Yu Sheng to demonstrate his prowess that was worthy of being ranked in the top 3 in the law rank in the future. Just how far are those two going to go with things? Su Ke mumbled right beside Yi Futian. It was him who had bested Yu Sheng before, however, Su Ke did not manage to end up overwhelming Yu Sheng. He won only because he was taking the attrition warfare approach with Yu Sheng. Had both of them actually clashed head-on, Su Ke might have actually been the one who ended up losing. But then again, Su Ke trained in the killing arts and cared little about how he won. It was even more obvious that Yu Sheng had gotten stronger, and considerably so. Bai Zhe clashed head-on with such a monster, and it was only natural that he ended up losing terribly. Su Ke stepped onto the platform in a flash, and a sword appeared in his hand. The sword aura around him whipped about in furious howl, as streaks of formless currents of the sword flowed between the heavens and the earth. Su Ke was a grade 6 noble, and it was a given that he had become even more formidable. Lights from 2 statues were seen showering down onto him. Su Ke from the Sword Palace. Is there any one of the seniors here who wish to spar with me? Su Ke asked. A grade 5 noble went onto the stage and said, I've always wanted to see how powerful the killing arts of the sword of the Tingxue house are. It seems like I've gotten my wish. The figure taking the challenge leaped into the air, but Su Ke vanished from where he stood before his opponent made it to the ground. The faces of many looked funny. Strike without proper announcement, eh? Su Ke had launched his attack before the figure was even able to stand up properly. Su Ke's opponent lashed out with a palm attack, bringing the force of the mountains to bear on Su Ke in the front while being on guard against any attacks coming from the back. Streaks of killing sword aura went to attack him from the back, and all carried intense murderous intent. He responded by lashing out with his palms on both sides of his body. Cracking noises were heard instead. The overwhelming huge palm attack striking at the front ended up being cut right in the middle. A sword went swooping by at tremendous speeds as if it was something that came from the heavens, heading for the throat of its target. The attack carried intense cold, sending chills to everyone's bones. The battle ended before the one who answered the challenge was even able to make it to the ground. I'm sorry if I have offended you. That was the sword technique of Tingxue House. No patterns, no rules, just seizing any opportunities there were to be seized. Su Ke sheathed his sword and backed away. Everyone was rendered speechless. It was the one who answered the challenge who claimed to want to know what the sword techniques of Tingxue House were like, and as such, he could not have blamed Su Ke for striking so suddenly. Everything happened so quickly that he was unable to process anything. However, other than the element of surprise, it was still true that Su Ke was powerful, as he ranked 5th in the battles for entry into the Holy Ji Palace. It was only natural for him to become one ranked in the upper ranks of the law rank in the future. He would at least be able to make it to the top 20. However, the one he fought was not one personally instructed by the palace lord, but one who advanced from the 1,000 Holy Islands. Even if he were to fight squarely with Su Ke, there was no certainty that he would have come out on top. That attack would have been even more ferocious if it came from the front, Yi Futian said to himself after watching Su Ke fight. Yi Futian was thinking that Su Ke had definitely merged the essence of the sword techniques of the master of Tingxue House with those learned from the sword demon. It seems like the little brothers who entered this time around all sport incredible prowess. It would be wise to take them seriously, Hua Fan said. Many spectators looked amused. While the sparring session was definitely an opportunity for the newbies to show what they were capable of, the stage still belonged to the old-timers. Every time there were newbies to fight, everyone would allow the newbies to demonstrate their abilities for a bit before the old-timers went in to teach them a lesson. However, the newbies from that particular batch were interesting, especially those who had experienced sparring sessions 3 years ago. They felt the talents demonstrated by this particular batch were possibly higher than that of the last batch. At the very least, from the looks of things at the moment, Yi Futian, Yu Sheng, and Su Ke performed admirably. Hua Jieyu of Daozang Palace was also a divine spiritual sorcerer, and it was a given that she was meant for great things in the future. Understood. Many went on to try their hands against the newbies, and the fights felt rather fun. There was nothing wrong with finding something amusing to do before the true mighty ones on the lower rank were pitted against each other. Yuan Zhan stepped out and made it onto the platform. Its wild body coursed with overwhelming force. He looked like a meaty mountain made of gold by just standing. A mighty one who seemed to be basking in dazzling golden lights walked out, looking down on the ape. Many who saw him walking out looked amused. Yuan Zhan is really going to get hurt really bad. The one who walked out was someone from Tianqing Pavilion, a grade 4 noble with incredible powers. Boom! Yuan Zhan stepped forward and began running in the battlefield. His opponent, however, simply stood in the air, basking in showers of light. Rows of golden halberds appeared behind him, and lightning crackled about as if the end of the world was near. The golden halberds fell from the sky with a loud crackle of thunder, out to kill everything below. Ning Huang's god-slaying halberd. Yi Futian watched the battle closely. The figure from Tianqing Pavilion was probably a student of Elder Ning. Yuan Zhan conjured a golden staff and struck with the 9 heavenly attacks. However, his opponent was simply too powerful. One halberd after another fell, accompanied by bolts of lightning as if they were some form of divine punishment dealt on their target. A devastating thunder halberd fell from the sky soon after. The staff in Yuan Zhan's hand was utterly destroyed, and he ended up falling hard onto the ground with a roar. The golden halberds kept raining from the sky, landing around his body. Bullying at its finest, Yi Shaoshi said coldly at the scene. That is something everyone here has been through, Qi Jia added. But bullying newbies of my place, the Battle Sage Palace, eh? Other newbies walked up one by one, and every one of them ended up overpowered. Furthermore, they went about bullying newbies of other pavilions or palaces. Yi Wuchen was also targeted by people of Tianqing Pavilion and was brutally bashed. Yi Shaoshi, Zhongli, and all others were no exceptions. When Hua Jieyu stepped forth, it was Xiang Zhiqin, a disciple of Daozang Palace who went to face her. Xiang Zhiqin was the princess of the Xiang Kingdom. It was a given that she was powerful, and she went on to overwhelm Hua Jieyu. Our little sister here possesses exceptional talents indeed, being able to reach grade 7 noble in less than a year. Furthermore, she's a divine spiritual sorcerer. I would advise you to quiet yourself and train hard. Lian Yuqing of Daozang Palace stood at a corner watching Hua Jieyu on the platform and commented. Hua Jieyu smiled and said, "Thank you for guidance, seniors." She went to take her place beside Yi Futian as soon as she finished. Lian Yuqing looked in Futian's direction and said, "You are now the only one who has yet to step onto the Zhonggong battle platform among all the new students this year. It's better to not miss the chance to learn from this opportunity." Learn? Yi Futian smirked. No newbies after Su Ke managed to win, and their opponents were those who seemed to target each one of them specifically. They did well in teaching the newbies by pummeling them to the ground. I don't see any meaning to all of this, Yi Futian said plainly. All of you new little brothers and sisters were proud sons and daughters, and you all had an intense ego. This served as an opportunity to warn all of you to never be arrogant and keep your feet on the ground with your training. It is also an encouragement of sorts, Lian Yuqing elaborated. Whatever you say, senior. Yi Futian smiled. I just think that as new students, the sparring sessions should have been one where we juniors get to watch our seniors fight, so as to remind ourselves to be diligent in our training. There is simply no meaning for us juniors to fight our seniors. If that is indeed so useful, why don't you seniors go pick fights with the sages and encourage yourselves? Is it not a part of your training to find out what you lack in battle and find out parts of yourself to improve? Lian Yuqing looked at Yi Futian. I don't see the need to do so. Yi Futian said, if there is anything lacking with us juniors, that would be level in planes. There is hardly anything else. You are indeed the champion. So arrogant. Many smirked at his comments. While such ways of encouragement did have its demerits, it had become the tradition of the place. As new students, they were expected to simply take it without question. However, Yi Futian seemed adamant on challenging the rules. That way you put it, is it to say that other than differences in planes, there is nothing that sets you apart from your seniors? Lian Yuqing added, even those who ranked high on the law rank dared not say that they were free from weaknesses and reigned supreme over others. The sparring sessions have always served as a platform to find out one's own weaknesses by fighting others. This is to improve. Yi Futian looked at Lian Yuqing and smiled brightly, then said, indeed. The eyes of everyone present turned to look at Yi Futian. He actually said, indeed. I have never seen a newbie so insolent. Even Bai Luli did not behave in such an arrogant manner when he first entered the Holy Ji Palace. Seems like the number one this time is indeed different from everyone else. Yi Futian, in turn, returned the gazes beamed at him, without any care about what they thought. Many new students looked at him and thought him to be immensely pompous. Qi Jia blinked and felt impressed. Our little brother is indeed no common folk. I never thought he would be daring enough to say something like that in front of his seniors. Chapter 603, Lian Yuqing stared at Yi Futian. The newcomer had been pretty arrogant back in Daozang Palace, asking to spar with Yun Feng on the platform, then went on to practically beat Yun Feng to a pulp. The damage was so bad that Yun Feng had yet to overcome the resulting emotional trauma. His mind remained very much crushed. Lian Yuqing stared at Yi Futian. The newcomer had been pretty arrogant back in Daozang Palace, asking to spar with Yun Feng on the platform, then went on to practically beat Yun Feng to a pulp. The damage was so bad that Yun Feng had yet to overcome the resulting emotional trauma. His mind remained very much crushed. Yi Futian came to rank 81st since that last battle. Yun Feng, on the other hand, was eliminated from the law rank. He had been in a deep depression since, and his training stagnated. As Yun Feng's senior, Lian Yuqing was very dissatisfied with Yi Futian. While Lian Yuqing acknowledged Yi Futian's talents and thought him to be one who would reach top 3 in law rank in the future, the new student was nonetheless little more than a junior who had just entered the Holy Ji Palace. The newbie, however, was incredibly rude and tremendously insolent. Lian Yuqing resented people with such personalities. The arrogant newbie even went so far as to say that he did not see any difference between the new students and their seniors, other than the difference in planes. Cultivation as a whole and the increase in planes came with the increase in one's awareness and comprehension. As a grade 1 noble, Lian Yuqing knew that very, very well. There were bound to be great differences of various sorts between those of lower planes and those of higher planes. The difference was far more vast than what Yi Futian had stated. If one with such arrogance and exceptional talent were to become powerful, it was a certain thing that they would have turned out to be nasty people who went about doing as they fancied. You are quite insolent indeed, Lian Yuqing looked at Yi Futian and said. He grew to dislike the newbie even more. Are you saying that none of the disciples of the Holy Ji Palace are better than you in any way but difference in planes? Shimin Hanjiang quipped. The way Yi Futian had put it was indeed too arrogant. Even he, the champion of the last batch, found Yi Futian insufferable. Shimin Hanjiang saw not even a single hint of humility in Yi Futian. All he saw was arrogance and rudeness. Hua Fan's gaze turned to Yi Futian as well. Yi Futian had never been one to follow rules right from the very beginning. Hua Fan came to know that from the very moment Yi Futian was accepted into the Holy Ji Palace. He had not been paying much attention to the newbie at first and had only heard things about Yi Futian. The disciples of various palaces and pavilions took an increasing interest in the champion of this very batch of newbies. There were many rumors circulating about Yi Futian in the Holy Ji Palace. He was called pretentious, vile, horny, and shameless. It seemed that he had even behaved insolently around Yun Shuisheng in front of everyone. His reputation was quite literally in the gutter. It was not until he stepped into Daozang Palace, made peace with Yun Shuisheng, went on the battle platform and beat Yun Feng that his reputation began to take a turn for the better. Hua Fan was finally able to see Yi Futian with his very own eyes, and everyone seemed to get to know Yi Futian in the flesh better. His flamboyant attitude, blatant disregard for rules, and even his handsome face, all seemed to speak volume about his pride and confidence. Such people were utter geniuses. Yi Futian might have still been a low-grade noble for the time being, but no one could guess how he would turn out if he became a sage one day. Yi Futian cast his gaze at everyone present and said, "If the sparring sessions are simply meant for gauging each other's strengths, there would have been nothing wrong with them. How it is done here, however, is simply an excuse for some to immerse themselves in the twisted joy of bullying those who come later. How is this even sparring? I participated with the intention to learn, to truly see the seniors spar against one another, and develop a comprehension about what I lack personally. I believe most newbies felt like I did. But from the battles that have taken place before, I failed to see any meaning in them." Yi Futian went on to look at everyone present. "If all here actually believe that being oppressed equals being encouraged, why don't you all get tortured by the elders of the place a time or two and encourage yourselves? During training, disciples at the top of the noble plane go looking for sages to evaluate their own progress. Do they have to spell it out for you?" Lian Yuqing added plainly, while the sparring sessions were indeed a little bit too intense, doing so allowed for seniors to demonstrate their capabilities in front of the juniors, to test themselves out and to allow juniors to develop an even deeper comprehension of many things. Yet, all you were able to see was how people of higher planes trampled over those of lower planes? Or rather, as you have said before, do you think that none of the disciples of the Holy Ji Palace are better than you in any way? That it's just a mere difference in planes? A tinge of anger was heard within Lian Yuqing's words, and his usual composure was cracking. "No matter how many times you ask, my answer remains the same. It is so indeed." Yi Futian looked at Lian Yuqing. "Cultivation is something done in phases. One will develop some measure of comprehension when one reaches a certain plane. Cultivators themselves need to have absolute confidence in themselves or they will fail to reach for greater heights. It isn't just me I'm talking about, I mean every single one of the new students who has been defeated today. I don't think any one of them is inferior to any one of you seniors. It is just a difference in planes, that is all. I believe they all feel the same." As soon as Yi Futian finished talking, the newbies, who had their share of getting beaten up, all turned to sport sharp looks on their faces and went on to stand tall and proud, shooting their gaze at the likes of Lian Yuqing. The sessions had all of them feeling frustrated and deeply resentful. Yi Futian had simply spoken what was on their mind on their behalf. Lian Yuqian smirked at Yi Futian's words and said, "What you have just said is another matter altogether. You are indeed good with words. Is this your excuse of not stepping into the platform?" Yi Futian had claimed to speak for everyone, and it was only natural that his words were taken as truths. "Here is where you are mistaken again." Yi Futian looked at Lian Yuqing. "You said it yourself, if such sessions were meant to have the newbies be aware of their own shortcomings, I indeed believe that there is no need for me to battle." Many looked rather amused at the words he just uttered. Is he admitting that he was being arrogant before? "So you mean to?" Lian Yuqing looked at Yi Futian. "What I meant was that I was not interested in battling before. Now, it is the opposite." Yi Futian spared a glance at Lian Yuqing before flashing and leaping onto the Zhonggong battle platform beneath. All eyes were on him at that very moment. Yi Futian bowed at everyone present and went to look up at everyone, saying, "Since this is my chance to verify what was being said about the sparring sessions, I'd like to do it my way to prove what I have just said, and to let all seniors here see what I had in mind with such sessions. Is there any senior here willing to give me time to prove my words?" Many turned to look at Hua Fan, and he, in turn, turned to look at Yi Futian and said, "Very well." Hua Fan wanted to see for himself how Yi Futian would go about proving anything. Yi Futian nodded. He looked at everyone again and spoke, "My plane is low, as I'm but a grade 8 noble. If any of the seniors were to come spar with me, there would be no doubt that I would end up losing. Since this is a sparring session and the seniors think there is more to it than just being of a higher plane compared to the newbies, I'd like seniors who have fought the juniors before, to come spar with me." He cast his glance at the ones from Tianqing Pavilion as soon as he was done talking, and added, "Are you the one who fought against Yuan Zhan earlier, senior? I would like to know, in what ways are you better than me, other than being of a higher plane?" Everyone within earshot looked bemused and came to somehow understand what he was trying to pull. This is one unbridled asshole indeed. He went pointing out individuals and asked how they were better than he was. How is anyone supposed to answer such a question? If the ones asked were unable to answer his question, it would have simply verified what he said before, that other than the difference in plane, they were no better than the juniors they had just bullied. Yi Shaoshi looked at the scene, dumbfounded, before looking rather amused. He knew that little brother of his well, after all. That little shit isn't trying to prove anything about the sparring sessions. He was simply trying to find a logical excuse to exact his revenge. Yi Shaoshi felt very astonished, thinking that his little brother was indeed the little brother he knew, one who stood tall and proud exacting his revenge. He had not, however, expected so many to have fallen into his little brother's trap. That disciple of Tianqing Pavilion glared at Yi Futian with cold eyes, then said with an equally cold tone, "I specialize in martial arts attacks, blending my will into the situation of things. We can't fight here due to our differences in planes. How are you going to prove anything?" "Of course I can," Yi Futian said and leaped into the air. His speed was frightening as he gathered terrifying aura about him. Overwhelming martial arts will burst from his body. The martial arts statue shone the most brightly among all the 8 statues, which appeared within an instant. The force gathered became increasingly powerful. Yi Futian lashed out with his hand and conjured a staff in his hand. He stepped forward and dealt a strike with the staff. The air was shaken, yet there was no stopping the growth of his aura. The force gathering about him became more terrifying, the shining statue's light grew increasingly bright and blinding. Yi Futian made consecutive attacks with his staff, and every strike felt like a thunderstorm, fearsome and unyielding. When he dealt his 5th attack, shadows of the staff were seen everywhere on the platform. The tremendous force went about pounding away at the air as the shining statue glowed with blinding light. He did not lash out with the 6th attack but stood in the air after dealing 5 blows. Many felt themselves trembling after seeing how he moved. While he was only a mere grade 8 noble, that force that he had just demonstrated in front of everywhere was extremely terrifying. He was, after all, the champion. Yunfeng's face went pale. He knew that even if he were to ask for a rematch, there was simply no way he would be able to beat Yi Futian. Yi Futian turned to look at that Tianqing Pavilion disciple and said, "I now ask for your guidance." He excused himself after he was done saying that. Yi Futian's techniques with the staff, his bearing, power of the body, and martial arts will all seem to have blended perfectly. That Tianqing Pavilion disciple looked incredibly troubled. While his plane was indeed far higher than Yi Futian's, and there was no doubt that his power would have been able to overwhelm what was demonstrated by Yi Futian, none of the spectators were blind. As soon as he made his move, everyone could tell who was better in terms of mastery of the art. Yi Futian seemed to be telling everyone with his actions that that was the sparring sessions that he had in mind. "Senior," Yi Futian said. The person he addressed was now looking immensely troubled, as there was no way he could finish this without making a fool of himself. "I admit defeat," that disciple of Tianqing Pavilion said, causing an uproar from everyone present. It was to say that other than being of higher plane, he had admitted that the art that he was best at proved inferior compared to Yi Futian. His actions, in turn, verified what Yi Futian said before. "What about you, senior?" Yi Futian looked at the one who had bested Yi Wuchen before, also a disciple of Tianqing Pavilion. That person looked troubled as well, as he specialized in martial arts just like the one Yi Futian challenged. So, even you seem to think that you only have the advantage in terms of the difference in planes, Yi Futian quipped with a smirk at the other party's utter silence. He went on to look at Xiang Zhiqin. How about you? Xiang Zhiqin had beaten Hua Jieyu before. Resonance of wills, blending into spells. How will you prove your superiority? Xiang Zhiqin glared at Yi Futian with cold eyes. Yi Futian stood silently. Fearsome spiritual qi circulated about him in an instant. Many were able to feel intensely dangerous martial arts willpower, and then, streaks of white flames danced in the air. The flames grew increasingly intense around him, and many were able to feel the eerie fires from above the Zhonggong battle platform, fires which felt incredibly cold. The fires felt as if they were capable of sucking the marrow from one's bones, and packed tremendously devastating damage potential. 3 statues glowed brightly when the fires appeared, which meant that the fires packed powers of 3 different elements. When Yi Futian ceased casting the skill and stopped what he was doing, the fires remained dancing in the air, as if they were fires that were capable of burning indefinitely. Yi Futian looked up and said to Xiang Zhiqin, "Please, your guidance." Xiang Zhiqin felt the power infused with the fires and was speechless. Many were shocked to their core at the scene and came to understand what Yi Futian was trying to do. He was retaliating as the champion of the battles to gain entry into the Holy Ji Palace. He was retaliating against everyone and proving his point along the way. It was natural that Lien Yuqing came to understand what Yi Futian was trying to do, as he glared at the newbie with cold eyes. That guy is indeed a genius like no other. Lien Yuqing felt a bad taste in his mouth admitting that, but the truth remained the truth. You are indeed the champion, one to emerge once every 3 years. I have to admit that your talents are indeed exceptional. All of them are middle-grade nobles. While they are of higher planes, they are inferior compared to you in these areas demonstrated, and it is no surprise. Lien Yuqing went on to add, this hardly proves anything. Well then, what did all those battles before prove? Yi Futian looked at Lien Yuqing and continued, I wonder what you specialize in, senior? Countless eyes froze as soon as he finished. Did Yi Futian just ask Lien Yuqing that? Lien Yuqing, who ranked 5th on the law rank. Lien Yuqing was startled himself, before shooting back at Yi Futian with a gaze as sharp as blades, I play the guqin. Do you? Yi Futian smiled and said, I know a thing or two about that. Chapter 604, Everyone's eyes fell onto Yi Futian and Lien Yuqing on the sparring place. Everyone's eyes fell onto Yi Futian and Lien Yuqing on the sparring place. Yi Futian answered that he knew a thing or two. He even knows how to play the guqin. And is he really trying battle Lien Yuqing using the guqin? Isn't this going a little too far? Lien Yuqing isn't like those Futian has beaten. He is a grade 1 noble, and furthermore, one who at the pinnacle of the plane, and ranked 5th on the law rank. The progression of one's cultivation was usually as most guessed, the higher one's plane, the deeper one's comprehension in all areas became. No one thought an outlier like Yi Futian would have appeared, let alone one capable enough to beat both the Tianqing Palace and Xiang Zhiqin. However, it was only natural that Lien Yuqing's comprehension was definitely higher than Yi Futian's, as he was, after all, a grade 1 noble ranked 5th on the law rank. Just how did Futian think he was going to best Lien Yuqing playing the guqin? This is a joke. It was true that Yi Futian had demonstrated extremely eye-catching talents prior to this and proved his worth as the champion of the entrance battles. He was even deemed capable of taking the entire Holy Ji Palace in 5 years. His name on the law rank would have been incredibly distinct as well. However, now he behaved like a thug. If he were to actually fight Lien Yuqing, wouldn't he just be trying to embarrass himself? Of course, there were also those among the spectators who knew that Yi Futian was good at playing the guqin, like Zhuge Xing. Zhuge Mingyue was Yi Futian's second older sister, and it was only natural that he knew where Yi Futian came from, as well as the reason why Zhuge Mingyue was able to go home, the guqin song played on Sky Mountain all those years back. He knew what others did not, for many of the students of the Holy Ji Palace had trained only within the palace for the past several years. They would not have known much about a nobody like Yi Futian. If Yi Futian had been unable to make it into the Holy Ji Palace, those senior students probably would not have even learned of his existence. But Zhuge Xing was nonetheless curious. Even though Yi Futian inherited the scores of the Yukio song passed down by the two emperors, is he actually capable of playing the subtleties of the song as intended? Just how does Yi Futian compare to one like Lian Yuqing in the art of the guqin? Lian Yuqing's eyes never moved away from Yi Futian all that while. Know a thing or two. So, you mean to test what you are capable of against me? Lian Yuqing asked calmly. He felt something was amiss. Yi Futian playing the guqin against me? Lian Yuqing recalled the day on the law battle platform where Yi Futian said that he would like to hear Lian Yuqing play a song sometime in the future. By that day, did he mean this today? Lian Yuqing became curious as to how capable Yi Futian was at playing the guqin and if Yi Futian was indeed as exceptional at the art of the guqin as he was at martial arts and sorcery. Even if he proves exceptional, so what? It would be my honor, Yi Futian said slowly as he fixed his gaze on Lian Yuqing. Lian Yuqing's gaze remained fixed on the silhouette on the Zhonggong battle platform. The tone Yi Futian had taken was similar to when he spoke to the Tianqing Palace students and Xiang Zhiqin, calm, yet brimming with confidence. Lian Yuqing was puzzled about what Yi Futian actually based his confidence on, yet the origin of this said confidence hardly mattered. He believed Yi Futian would learn that while it was indeed important for cultivators to have faith in themselves, they were also required to know their place. You are a new one on the lower rank, and it shouldn't be someone like me to teach you anything personally. However, since you are so eager to prove your skills with the guqin, I am not in a position to refuse, Lian Yuqing replied and began taking his steps toward the Zhonggong battle platform. He dropped onto the platform and came face to face with Yi Futian. As both of them were standing on the Zhonggong battle platform and were going to determine who was better at the art of the guqin, it was only natural for them to do it with guqin songs. Yi Futian wanted to verify the validity of his idea about the sparring sessions, and as such, he was forbidden from fighting directly. There was, after all, little meaning for a grade 8 noble fight a grade 1 noble. How do you want to go about it? Lian asked Yi Futian. Yi Futian crossed his legs and sat. A guqin appeared in front of him. He caressed the strings with both hands, and the aura around him changed into something else entirely in an instant. At that very moment, Yi Futian looked calm and collected, as if he had become one with the cosmos around him, and of course, one with the guqin before him. I will let you decide on that, senior, Yi Futian said as he began plucking the strings. The sound of the guqin was soon heard, depicting a realm within the minds of those within earshot, tranquil and peaceful like a silent night, casting off all worries and being kept company by nothing else but the sound of the instrument. The song was one capable of cleansing people's minds, enabling those who heard it to relax. That demonstration was devoid of the prickly, antagonistic air demonstrated prior. At the very moment, those who heard the song felt as if they were basking under moonlight while listening to a soothing melody, instead of being at the sparring place. The song was simple, yet the simple song was capable of bringing people of their levels into a realm that was so peaceful and quiet. Yi Futian's skill with the guqin was indeed formidable. Yi Futian's mastery of the guqin apparently was far more than what he had described himself, knowing a thing or two, and he was definitely a master at it. Seeing that tranquil and handsome young man playing the guqin made everyone feel as if they were watching someone else altogether, as the one playing the instrument was devoid of any hint of obnoxiousness that he so happily demonstrated before. The spectators felt as if they were seeing another side of Yi Futian. Lian Yuqing knew what Yi Futian was trying to pull. He went on to sit cross-legged as well, and began playing the guqin across from Yi Futian. The sound of his playing melded perfectly with the feeling exuded by Yi Futian. Sounds of both sides melded harmoniously with one another. Spectacular, many said to themselves. Lian Yuqing demonstrated his exceptional mastery at the art by blending in with Yi Futian's playing. While it was easy to learn to play the guqin itself, it was very difficult to draw pictures in people's minds with it. Blending one's thoughts playing the guqin with that exuded from the guqin songs of others proved even more difficult. They seemed to clash and spar, using their own ways. Yi Futian's guqin sounds went smoothly as intended, growing increasingly intense. It was as if a scroll painting was being unfolded gradually, being laid before the eyes of everyone. Yi Futian was not disturbed in any way by Lian Yuqing's playing. He kept playing his tune. The painting seemed to depict a young man learning to play the guqin from a master. One simple guqin song after another was blended seamlessly by Yi Futian into one song, as if every song had actually been a part of one long one. With the painting unfolded, the guqin sound spread out as well. The melody of the white feathers garment was heard and many felt as if they saw a palace before them. The young man was playing his guqin there for amusement, yet he also seemed to have been fighting and arguing with someone else. Lian Yuqing was still playing. His style changed continuously, following Yi Futian's changes, and went on to stick closely to Yi Futian's tempo, blending his tune into the illustration. He played a dance tune as Yi Futian was playing melody of the white feathers garment, and the two seemed to be benefiting from each other. Lian Yuqing's playing hardly affected Yi Futian's sounds. The illustration of the songs was still in Yi Futian's control. The World, a song depicting the grace and glory of the world, was soon quickly replaced by a chaotic nation, singing about the sorrows and bloody, noble sacrifices of the world in chaos. As the intensity of the guqin sounds grew, many were swept off their feet and taken into the realm illustrated by the guqin sounds. Many saw Yi Futian's expression change, blending many simple tunes and making one perfect tune out of them. He even infused the song with his own emotions. The resulting image depicted was rich and vivid. Is this what you'd call knowing a thing or two? However, what Lian Yuqing was capable of seemed even more out of this world. Regardless of the illustrations of the songs played by Yi Futian, Lian Yuqing had no problem keeping up, blending Yi Futian's style with compatible tunes. There was never a hint of messiness, and it spoke volumes of Lian Yuqing's mastery at the art. He must have mastered countless guqin songs, being able to play with such poise and composure. Both men demonstrated their art at guqin through different means and styles. He is illustrating his own life and experiences using the instrument. Many listened quietly and their eyes were filled with astonishment as they looked at Yi Futian. The ups and downs and joys and sorrows of his life were made into something like a fine brew, all found within one song. One was able to feel the impulsive youth gradually turn into someone composed, reserved and confident throughout his experiences. The state of his mind changed with the tune, yet the purity seemed to remain the same throughout. When the song, Elegance, was played at its climax, everyone's emotions burned alongside the sound of Yi Futian's playing. Streaks of light emanated from the statue, draping over Yi Futian as if it had achieved some mystical resonance with him. Lian Yuqing continued matching him with a compatible tune. The long robe reaching the floor billowed in the wind, making him seem like some legendary figure. Lian Yuqing is indeed a musical sorcerer ranked 5th on the law rank, able to blend seamlessly with other people's playing. While Yi Futian's skills with the guqin are indeed those of a master, brimming with youthfulness, Lian Yuqing's mastery is superior in terms of technique. Many thought it impossible for Yi Futian to learn songs from Lian Yuqing. However, Yi Futian paused and smiled. Your art is definitely exceptional, befitting of one ranked 5th on the law rank, senior. You are not bad yourself, Lian Yuqing replied. The tune I will play next will not require you to play something compatible. If you were able to play something remotely similar, it would be my defeat, Yi Futian said. If I'm unable to, I'd be the one defeated instead, Lian Yuqing replied forcefully. He deemed himself unbeatable in the art of the guqin. It is a song that I have acquired by chance. I seek your guidance for it, Yi Futian said, then lowered his head, plucking the strings. An illustration of some sort was born yet again, and it was different from what was played before. What Yi Futian was playing now was no longer about his own life, but was of a spectator telling the story of the life of another person. Lian Yuqing's expression was calm. He plucked the strings and played in a similar way. The faces of those around them began to change. They had heard the song on the day of the entrance battles. The one who played back then was by Luli. Furthermore, there were also some from the Holy Sage Pavilion who had heard the tune before, like Hua Fan. Yi Futian is able to play something like this? Many within earshot were swept into the intense illustration as the sound of the guqin reverberated in the air. Even the statues around them began to emanate beams of light, like they were being touched by the guqin sound as well. Lian Yuqing began to look troubled. The tune seemed to be an exceptional kind. As time went by, he felt that it was rather difficult to keep up with. It was as if the tune was trying to knock him over. Those adept at the guqin knew to appreciate the songs played. Yi Futian's song directly interfered with Lian Yuqing's mind. It was as if that song had no equivalent. At the very least, Lian Yuqing did not feel the songs he knew were qualified enough to match it. His fingers plucked on the strings furiously. The speed of the tune he played slowed, then was sustained by only his exceptional mastery at the art. When the painting illustrated by the tune was unfolded, it was a mighty, brimming piece. The state depicted by the sound was that of a whole world, the heart of kings and emperors. All 8 statues were influenced by the tune, emanating dazzling beams of light in pulses, showering onto Yi Futian. Spiritual qi danced around in the air, and the spiritual qi in the Zhonggong battle platform pulsed to the tempo of the guqin sounds. Lian Yuqing looked incredibly troubled by then, however, he did not stop. The tunes he played changed from one to another, and exceptional sounds kept emanating from his instrument. But then again, even his exceptional mastery proved inadequate to cover the one played by Yi Futian. His tune became encroached one time after another, for the tune of kings and emperors would not tolerate being defiled by other sounds. Stronger illustrations were born. Wind danced on the Zhonggong battle platform and the 8 statues emanated dazzling light that circled around Yi Futian. The beams grew increasingly tall. Countless eyes were set on the silhouette of Yi Futian playing. With intense emotions welling up inside them, the spectators watched him play. Their minds seemed to have been entirely carried away by the illustrations drawn by the song, as if telling an incredibly epic legend. It told of the divine prefecture, its history and culture, the chaotic world and the yearning for one to bring order. The illustration became increasingly powerful and vivid as the tune went on. All 8 statues glowed with bright, tall beams of light. Air of terror seemed to have been swept in from nowhere. The clouds changed and endless worldly spiritual qi rained down from above. Yi Futian remained seated cross-legged, losing himself in all of it. Many even began to look at him with dazed eyes of admiration. Twang! A crisp sound was heard. Lian Yuqing's playing was completely swept away, halting abruptly. The string of Lian Yuqing's instrument had broken. The guqin was smeared with the blood spewed from his mouth. He wanted to see yet again if he would be able to make it into Guqin Valley. Yu Sheng, Hua Jieyu, and some others flashed and took to the air, going after Yi Futian. Many in the sparring place looked funny as one figure after another left. Despite the event of the day being sparring sessions, Yi Futian practically stole the event's thunder. With Guqin Valley resonating with Yi Futian, many went after him, and that rendered things rather awkward for the event itself. Shall we continue or just pause it for now? Many turned to look at Hua Fan. At that very moment, an elder said while standing in the air, "Those who wish to leave are free to do so, but it is probably something that has nothing to do with you. Those who stay, continue the sessions." They left as soon as the announcement was made. Some others were seen leaving, but most elected to stay behind. That practice was indeed inappropriate. Since Yi Futian proved his point to be true, we shall just abolish that round of events in further sessions then, said a voice. Many turned to look at the one who spoke. It was Do Kun from Battle Sage Palace, and Yi Futian was considered his junior. Do Kun was ranked second on the law rank. Many went silent at his words. While there was no absolute right or wrong, Yi Futian had beaten Lian Yuqing, and it was only natural that his points were right. From that battle, it was obvious that Yi Futian's ranking on the law rank would have made a considerable leap. This will be my last time hosting the sparring sessions. The future sessions will be in your hands. The sessions for newbies in the future shall be restricted to the difference of 2 planes at best, and they should be held mainly to provide guidance, Hua Fan said calmly. The battle of the day spelled more than Lian Yuqing's defeat, it was also the defeat of obsolete rules. Yi Futian broke it as a newbie. If there was a day where he would end up as the champion of the law rank, it was something that had to be acknowledged, regardless of what everyone else thought of him. Hua Fan did not make one thing clear, however. There was a huge possibility that the future law rank would have been overseen by Yi Futian, and that was probably something that would happen within just a few years. Continue, Hua Fan cleared his thoughts as he said. He felt immensely moved. Many prominent figures appeared from every generation, and the ones to emerge from the younger generations were destined to best the ones who came before them. Chapter 606. The Guqin Valley was one of the many relics within the Qingdao Palace, and a famous one at that. Lu Guangxing's illustrious reputation was one of the reasons. Another was that no one had been truly able to touch Lu Guangxing's Guqin in the Guqin Valley and get his approval. This was indicative of the kind of character Lu Guangxing was. True to the meaning of his name, he lived wildly, and even after his death, none of the palace's talents had been able to impress him. The Guqin Valley was one of the many relics within the Qingdao Palace, and a famous one at that. Lu Guangxing's illustrious reputation was one of the reasons. Another was that no one had been truly able to touch Lu Guangxing's Guqin in the Guqin Valley and get his approval. This was indicative of the kind of character Lu Guangxing was. True to the meaning of his name, he lived wildly, and even after his death, none of the palace's talents had been able to impress him. The entrance of the Guqin Valley was a stone cave. Many people were gathered here, and at the head of them was Yi Futian. He was holding a Guqin in his arms, playing continuously. If Yi Futian were to stop playing, the resonance between him and the Guqin Valley may be disrupted. Yi Futian could feel the incredibly powerful energy of musical will within this valley. He walked through the stone doors into the valley. It was a whole new world on the other side of the arched doors. Startlingly bright and cheery, it was like a private little world of one's own. There were green plains and strange jagged rocks, mountains, and springs. It was a world filled with life, and an invisible energy seemed to inhabit the space as well. Those were the musical notes that danced in time to Yi Futian's music. Behind Yi Futian, many people walked out into the valley as well. Unlike Yi Futian, they felt a sort of pressure, one that surrounded them from all directions in the Guqin Valley. It was as if the musical will was seeping into their minds, making them feel incredibly uncomfortable. It was as though they were about to lose their minds. "Let's wait outside," Yi Wuchen whispered. Hua Jieyu and Yuxing nodded, and they all retreated. Su Ke, Zhongli, and many others had come as well, but they too went outside the Guqin gardens to wait. Only Lian Yuqing followed Yi Futian in, similarly holding a Guqin in his arms and playing. However, the musical notes were relentless still in their invasion of his mind. In the past, even if one was not a musical sorcerer, they would still come to the Guqin Valley in order to train their spiritual will. But to him, this place held a different significance. Furthermore, regardless of who came here to train, they would not come before the Guqin in the Guqin Valley. Lian Yuqing lifted his head to gaze into the distance. The ground was higher there, and the surroundings elegant. A Guqin lay quietly on a smooth large rock. At this very moment, the Guqin was actually playing itself, and the musical notes that spread across the space were resonating with the Guqin in Yi Futian's arms. Lian Yuqing saw with his own eyes how Yi Futian walked forward until he was right before the Guqin. This Guqin had become famous because of Lu Guangxing, and was hailed as an iconic Guqin in the barren state. It was called the Soul Guqin. Lian Yuqing's Guqin was peaceful and calm, just like his own inner state. He had always wanted to experience just how proudly defiant the enchanted Guqin of Lu Guangxing's was, though it was a pity that he never actually got the chance to. Now, he watched as the newcomer to the Holy Ji Palace, who had been first in the law battle, walk before the Sol Guqin and sit down, crossing his legs. He felt a twinge of jealousy towards Yi Futian. Yi Futian had stopped playing by now, and he glanced at the Guqin in his hands. He remembered how this Guqin from the ancient Lulan in the ancient barren world had been unwilling to follow him back then. Now it seemed like he would never have any use for it in the future. However, Yi Futian would keep the Guqin with him as a memento. Since he had already walked all the way over here, he could predict what would happen next. It was a form of acknowledgement that the musical notes had drawn him here. It would also be a form of inheritance for him as well. Yi Futian sat down on the ground and looked at the Guqin before him. The words Sol Guqin were carved into the side of the Guqin. It was probably the name of this Guqin. He reached out and touched the Guqin lightly. In an instant, the strings of the Guqin moved, and Yi Futian's fingers danced along with the strings as well. The surroundings were immediately filled with musical notes, which floated into Yi Futian's mind. Yi Futian closed his eyes and immersed himself within the experience, quietly feeling the musical notes that were floating into his head, and remembering every single note, burning them into his memory. An image surfaced in Yi Futian's head. A middle-aged man sat right where he was, playing the Guqin with both hands. It was the previous owner of the Sol Guqin. As Yi Futian listened to the music, he felt a hint of Guqin spirit within the Sol Guqin. This was the resonance created between him and the Guqin spirit, which had also laid down a musical boundary around the Guqin valley to seal the Guqin here. If Yi Futian was not playing the Yukio song, he would not have been able to even set foot into this place. The music playing in Yi Futian's mind felt wild and unrestrained to him. He had never learned such a wild song before. Back then, he had learned songs like The World and A Chaotic Nation. Those were songs that had moments of magnificence and solemnity, but the only word that came to mind as he listened to this song was wild. It was as if the song had taken on a form of its own and was on the level of a grandmaster. At this moment, Lian Yuqing was still struggling outside the musical boundary, trying to get to where Yi Futian was. However, he realized that he was slowly losing his will. If he were really to force his way through the boundary, he may very well lose his mind. Finally, Lian Yuqing stopped and sighed as he looked towards Yi Futian. He then turned to leave. He would remember everything that had happened today as a point of motivation for himself. Once he got back, he was going to train his state of mind as well as his abilities in the Guqin path. Yi Futian stayed in the Guqin valley for many days. Yu Sheng, Hua Jieyu and the rest waited outside for him throughout. By this time, the sparring sessions had come to an end. The real sparring had started after Yi Futian left, with powerful individuals clashing against each other. Even those at the top of the law rank had gotten involved as well. But the fight that Yi Futian had walked out of remained the most shocking battle of this series of sparring sessions. On the last day of the 10,006th year of the Divine Prefecture calendar, many of the Holy Ji Palace's disciples left to visit home. Those who didn't leave kept busy with their training. The new law rank was now carved onto the stone wall in the law battle platform area. Once the sparring sessions ended every year, there would be great changes to the law rank. However, this year, the biggest change in the law rank was attributed only to one person. Many people were gathered before the law rank. Zhuge Xing, Xiang Zhiqin, Yun Feng, and the others were all there, staring at the new rankings. Shockingly, Yi Futian's name was at the top. He was 10th in the law rank. Despite only being a grade 8 noble, he had made it to 10th place. This was practically a miracle in the Holy Ji Palace. Of course, no one dared to question this ranking. Yi Futian had already displayed the potential of someone who would rank first in the law rank from his performance in battle. Furthermore, his skills in sorcery and martial arts were all outstanding, and he had defeated Lian Yuqing in battle using the Guqin path. If it wasn't for the fact that Yi Futian was still at a lower plane, and was not as physically strong, he may have ranked even higher. Other than Yi Futian, Yu Sheng had entered the law rank as well, though he was further down the list. But it seemed like the two names who would eventually be on top had already appeared within the law rank. people made it a point to remember Yi Futian's name. Where the relics were, there were many people training everywhere as well. Some occasionally had their eye on the Guqin Valley as well. Hua Jieyu was waiting outside the stone doors of the Guqin Valley. Today was the last day of the year, but Yi Futian was still training inside, refusing to come out. Just then, a handsome figure walked out from the valley. All smiles, he gazed towards the countless people waiting outside the Guqin Valley for him. A smile appeared on Hua Jieyu's face. Walking up to him, she first threw him a sharp glance before asking gently, "How's your training?" "There was the inheritance of a senior within the Guqin Valley," Yi Futian replied. "I managed to obtain several superb songs and the senior's Guqin." He then chuckled, "Did a day without me feel like an eternity?" Hua Jieyu pouted at him. She thought he was being incredibly thick-skinned. "I thought you weren't going to come out," Hua Jieyu said softly. "Why wouldn't I? I'm planning to welcome the new year with my wife-to-be." Yi Futian laughed, before looking at Yi Wuchen. "Wuchen, call Qinyu over. Let's find a place to sit." "Sure," Yi Wuchen replied, "Where shall we meet?" "Up there." Yi Futian pointed to a mountain. "That's the highest point in this place, we should get a pretty good view." Yi Wuchen nodded and turned to leave. "Yu Sheng, I'll get little Condor to bring Qing Xian over. Let's head there first." Yi Futian smiled. Yu Sheng nodded, and they set off towards the tall mountain. At the peak of that mountain, one could get a bird's-eye view of the area. Staring down at the many relics below, Yi Futian laughed. "Just training in the law power zone alone has taken me half a year, and there's still plenty of resources left for me to train with for a good while. There probably are still places like the Guqin Valley among these relics. Seems like I'll be able to train well in the palace for the next few years." After the sparring sessions, no one would be picking a fight with Yi Futian. Which was good, since he had come to the palace in order to train and ascend to higher planes. "We're still going to be training here for a few years?" Yi Shaoshi clenched his teeth. He was thinking that he wouldn't be able to take it. "Seventh brother, if you're going to be so lazy, I'm going to have a chat with second sister when I get the chance." Yi Futian grinned at him. "You think that scares me?" Yi Shaoshi glared scornfully at Yi Futian, but he still seemed a little unconfident. "Yuan Zhan, why didn't you go back to Mount Taihang?" Yi Futian turned to Yuan Zhan and asked. "The old man had me follow you," Yuan Zhan replied, gazing into the distance. "But you didn't have to stick with me all the way," Yi Futian rubbed between his eyebrows, marveling at how rigid these demonic beasts could be. Soon, Yu Wuchen, Lu Qinyu, the Black-Winged Condor, Qing Xian, and Lulan Shui arrived at the mountain peak at the same time. Yi Futian smiled at Lu Qinyu. "Qinyu, you've become prettier. Looks like our Wuchen has done a good job taking care of you." Lu Qinyu had been training in the palace as well. As she transcended to a higher plane, her aura became even more outstanding as well. "Who is Yun Shuisheng, and why have I been hearing things about her even at the Sword Pavilion?" Lu Qinyu looked towards Yi Futian, seeming to ask in all seriousness. Yi Futian blinked and looked at the stunning figure before him. "I was in the wrong. This woman is ruthless," he thought to himself. "It's the last day of the year already, let's not argue today." Yi Qingxian walked up to them, smiling gently. "Qingshuan's right." Yi Futian nodded. "Why does it feel like we're missing something, like roasted meat or whatnot?" As he spoke, Yi Futian's gaze landed on the Black-Winged Condor, and the condor jumped up hurriedly, speaking up woefully, "Boss, if there's anything you want, just give the order and I'll go get it done." The condor was wary of the others having any funny ideas about it. It spooked him. "Does anyone want alcohol?" a voice rang out. Yi Futian turned to look, and saw Zui Qianzhou walking over with Su Kei, carrying a pot of wine with him. "Sure." Yi Futian smiled and nodded. This situation was perfect for drinking. "Looks like I have no choice but to bring out the good stuff." Zui Qianzhou seemed a little pained. From a storage ring, he took out many wine cups. There was a great variety of cups, with some made of gold and others of jade. Yi Futian was dumbfounded at how exquisite Zui Qianchou's taste was. Everyone sat together, and Zui Qianchou poured them all a cup of wine, chuckling, "Despite being alive for so long, I haven't actually had the chance to welcome the new year with people who aren't my master. To fate, which brought us all together." Su Ke chuckled, thinking to himself that life really was interesting. He had thought himself a person who did not get along with the rest, but after arriving at the Holy Ji Palace, he had discovered people he didn't mind, like Zui Qianzhou and Yi Wuchen. Yi Futian and Yu Xing seemed like interesting people too. Perhaps this really was the workings of fate at play. To fate. Yi Futian laughed, and everyone raised their cups and drank. The sparring sessions a few days ago were really satisfying. Su Ke grinned. "How long do you all think it will take for us to take over the law rank of the Holy Ji Palace?" Most of those who would predictably be at the forefront of the rankings were here at this gathering. "Probably 3 years, Zui Qianchou replied. 3 years? Yi Futian looked towards the Holy Ji Palace. "I've never thought about conquering the law rank." Zui Qianchou and Su Ke were taken aback for a moment and glanced over at Yi Futian. Then they both chuckled. Indeed, they had forgotten that not everyone had their sights set on the law rank. The rankings meant little to Yi Futian. Then what about the barren sky ranking in the barren state? Su Ke looked towards Yi Futian. Yi Futian was still staring off into the distance. He thought about the barren sky ranking in the barren state. A smile then appeared on his face, but he did not reply. In years to come, when Su Ke recalled this memory again, he would finally understand the meaning behind Yi Futian's smile. You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.